Sometimes life strips away everything you thought you had, leaving you standing in the ruins, wondering how you'll protect the one person who matters most. Noah Carter knew that feeling all too well as he stared at the sagging porch of his uncle's farmhouse, his 8-year-old daughter Ellie clutching his hand. The whole town called the place worthless. The roof leaked, the foundation cracked, and his ex-wife's parents had made it clear what they thought of him dragging their granddaughter to that rotting shack. Noah was a single father with empty pockets and nowhere else to go. This crumbling house in rural Kentucky was his last chance. He figured he'd fix what he could and maybe give Ellie a place to call home. What he didn't know was that his eccentric uncle had hidden something extraordinary in the bones of that old house. As Noah began tearing away rotted boards, he discovered maps, keys, and secrets that would change everything. But would anyone believe that this forgotten farmhouse held the key to a fortune worth $150 million? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The gravel road to the farmhouse seemed to stretch longer with each pothole that rattled Noah's aging pickup truck. In the passenger seat, Ellie pressed her face against the window, watching the Kentucky countryside roll past in shades of autumn gold and rust. Her small backpack sat between them, containing everything she'd deemed essential for their new life. 3 books, a worn stuffed rabbit named Mr. Hops, and a framed photo of her and Noah from last Christmas. "Daddy, are we really going to live here?" she asked, her voice carrying that particular mixture of excitement and uncertainty that 8-year-olds possessed when facing the unknown. Noah glanced at her in the rearview mirror of his heart, this brave little girl, who'd never once complained about their circumstances, who'd packed her few belongings, without question, when he'd explained they had to leave their apartment. "We're going to try, sweetheart. Uncle Samuel left us this place, and maybe we can make something good out of it." The farmhouse appeared around a bend, like a tired old man settling into his chair. Noah's first glimpse stole his breath, but not in the way he'd hoped. The 2-story structure leaned slightly to the left, as if the weight of years had finally become too much to bear upright. Grey paint peeled from the clapboard, siding in long strips that flapped in the October breeze like surrender flags. The wraparound porch sagged at both ends, supported by posts that looked more like toothpicks than proper columns. Weeds had claimed the front yard with the enthusiasm of conquerors, rising waist-high around rusted farm equipment that seemed to emerge from the earth like the bones of prehistoric creatures. A barn stood behind the house, its red paint faded to the color of dried blood, one door hanging askew on broken hinges. Noah pulled to a stop beside what might have once been a flower garden and now resembled a small jungle. He sat for a moment, hands gripping the steering wheel, fighting the urge to put the truck in reverse and drive until the gas ran out. "It looks like the house from that movie," Ellie said, unbuckling her seatbelt. "The one where the family moves to the scary house, but then they fix it up and it becomes beautiful." Her optimism was a gift he didn't deserve. Noah managed to smile. "You're right. Houses just need love, don't they?" The inheritance letter from the lawyer's office lay folded in his shirt pocket, the edges soft from handling. 3 months ago, when it had arrived at their cramped apartment in Louisville, Noah had stared at it in disbelief. Samuel Carteris, father's brother, a man he'd met perhaps 5 times in his 34 years, had died and left him property. The lawyer had been apologetic about the condition of the place, warning that it might be more burden than blessing. Now, standing in the overgrown driveway with his daughter's hand in his, Noah understood what the lawyer had meant. The front steps creaked ominously under their weight. Noah pulled the heavy key from his pocket, an old-fashioned brass thing that looked like it belonged in a museum, and worked it into the lock. The door opened with a groan that seemed to echo through the house's bones. Inside, dust motes danced in shafts of afternoon sunlight that filtered through grimy windows. The smell hit them immediately, mustiness layered with something else, something that spoke of a life interrupted rather than concluded. Pine wood and old leather, coffee grounds and pipe tobacco, lingering essence of a man who'd lived alone but not lonely. The living room stretched before them, furnished with pieces that had clearly been chosen for comfort rather than style. A worn leather armchair sat beside a stone fireplace, positioned to catch the morning light from the east window. Bookshelves lined one entire wall, packed with volumes on subjects ranging from geology to philosophy, their spines faded but cared for. "Look, Daddy." Ellie had discovered a collection of rocks displayed on the mantelpiece, not ordinary stones, but specimens that caught the light and threw it back in unexpected ways. Geodes split to reveal crystal hearts, smooth river stones with veins of quartz, and what appeared to be fossils embedded in sedimentary layers. Noah picked up one of the stones, surprised by its weight. A small card beneath it read, "Limestone, with calcite veins North 40, spring of 97. Each specimen had a similar notation, location and date, recorded in precise handwriting. The kitchen revealed more of Samuel's methodical nature. Canning jars lined the pantry shelves, their contents long since spoiled but their labels intact. Tomatoes, 2019. Green beans, July 2019. Applesauce, October 2018. A man who'd planned for winters, who'd understood the value of preparation and patience. But it was when Noah opened the back door that he truly began to understand who his uncle had been. The workshop occupied what had once been a screened porch, its windows now glassed in for year-round use. Hand tools hung from pegboard walls, with the precision of a surgeon's instruments, each chisel plain and saw in its designated place. The workbench, built from what appeared to be a single massive oak slab, bore the gentle scars of decades of careful work. Noah ran his fingers along the bench's surface, feeling the slight depressions worn by countless projects. These weren't the tools of a hobbyist, but of a master craftsman. Wood shavings curled in corners, and the scent of linseed oil still hung in the air. On a shelf above the bench sat a collection of small wooden boxes, each one a work of art. Dovetail joints fit with the precision of puzzle pieces, finishes that glowed with hand-rubbed warmth. Your uncle was quite the craftsman. Noah turned to find a woman standing in the doorway, Asian features, early 40s, with graying hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. She wore jeans and a flannel shirt, work boots that had seen actual work. "I'm sorry," Noah said, stepping protectively closer to Ellie. "I didn't hear you come in." "Sarah Chen," she said, extending a calloused hand. "I'm the librarian in town, but I also helped Samuel with some of his research projects. I saw your truck and thought I'd introduce myself." Her handshake was firm, direct. "You must be Noah. Samuel talked about you." "He did?" Noah couldn't hide his surprise. "I barely knew him." Sarah's smile carried a hint of sadness. "He knew more about you than you might think. Said you were the only one in the family who'd inherited the Carter. Stubbornness meant it as a compliment." She looked around the workshop with obvious affection. "He spent hours out here, especially these last few years, always working on some project, always measuring and calculating." Ellie had discovered a child-sized stool tucked under the workbench, its surface worn smooth by small hands. "Did Uncle Samuel have kids?" she asked. "No, sweetheart," Sarah said gently, "but he hoped someday he might have family visit who'd appreciate his work. Looks like he was right." She turned to Noah. "Are you planning to stay?" The question carried weight beyond its simple words. Noah looked around the workshop, at the tools that represented a lifetime of patient craftsmanship, at his daughter already making herself at home on Samuel's stool. "We don't have anywhere else to go," he said, the honesty surprising him. Sarah nodded as if she'd expected that answer. Samuel left detailed notes about the property, maintenance schedules, repair priorities, even instructions for the vegetable garden. Said whoever inherited the place would need guidance. She paused, studying Noah's face. He also left some interesting research materials. Documents about the land, geological surveys, water table measurements might be worth looking at, especially if you're planning to make this work long-term. Before Noah could ask what she meant, The sound of vehicles on gravel announced visitors. Through the kitchen window, he watched two luxury SUVs park behind his battered pickup. His heart sank as he recognized the occupants. Margaret and Robert Whitman emerged from the first vehicle with the careful dignity of people accustomed to being important. Noah's former in-laws had dressed for the occasion, Margaret in a tailored coat that probably cost more than Noah made in a month. Robert in the kind of casual wear that screamed expensive brands. Behind them came their daughter Jessica, Noah's ex-wife, her lawyer's briefcase suggesting this wasn't a social call. "Daddy?" Ellie had noticed them too, her voice small. "It's okay, baby," Noah said, though his gut told him otherwise. The confrontation began before they'd even reached the porch. Margaret's voice carried through the open windows, pitched loud enough to ensure neighbors blocks away could hear. "This is what you call suitable housing for our granddaughter. Robert, look at this place. It's barely standing." Noah met them at the front door, Sarah beside him in a gesture of quiet support. Margaret's gaze swept over the farmhouse's weathered exterior with the disdain of someone appraising condemned property. "Hello, Margaret, Robert." Noah kept his voice level. "Jessica." His ex-wife had the grace to look uncomfortable, but her mother showed no such restraint. "Noah, we've tried to be patient," Margaret began, "but this is beyond reason. You cannot seriously intend to raise Ellie in this." She gestured dismissively at the house. "This ruin." "It's our home now," Noah said simply. Robert stepped forward, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to getting his way. "We've consulted with attorneys, Noah. Given the circumstances, your financial situation, the condition of this property, we have grounds to petition for custody. Ellie deserves stability." The words hit like physical blows. Noah felt Sarah's presence beside him, steady and reassuring, but his focus narrowed to his ex-in-laws' faces. "Ellie is my daughter. And she's our granddaughter." Margaret snapped. "Look around you, Noah. The roof is falling in, there's no proper heating, and you're hours from decent schools. What kind of future can you give her here?" Jessica finally spoke, her voice softer but no less cutting. "Noah, be reasonable. Mom and Dad have offered to help. Ellie could have her own room, go to private school, have opportunities." "She has opportunities with me." "Like what?" Margaret's laugh was sharp. "Learning to live in poverty? Watching her father fail at another desperate scheme?" The words stung because they carried echoes of Noah's own fears. But before he could respond, Ellie appeared beside him, her small hand slipping into his. "I like it here," she said, her 8-year-old voice clear and certain. "Uncle Samuel left us treasures." Margaret's expression softened when she looked at her granddaughter, but her resolve didn't waver. "Sweetheart, you haven't seen what a real home looks like yet. Grammy and Grandpa have a beautiful house with a swimming pool and your own playroom." "I want to stay with Daddy," Ellie said firmly. The silence that followed carried the weight of unspoken threats. Finally, Robert reached into his coat and pulled out a business card. "Our attorney will be in touch," he said, pressing it into Noah's hand. "We hope you'll see reason before this becomes unpleasant." They left as abruptly as they'd arrived, their expensive vehicles disappearing down the gravel road in clouds of dust that seemed to linger like accusations. Sarah remained after they'd gone, her presence a quiet comfort in the aftermath of confrontation. "How much time do you think I have?" Noah asked. "Before they file papers?" "Maybe a week, 2 at most." Sarah's voice was matter-of-fact. "But Noah, there's something you should know about this place. About why Samuel left it to you specifically." She walked to the living room window, looking out at the overgrown land that stretched toward the tree line. Samuel wasn't just a craftsman. He was a geologist, self-taught but brilliant. He spent 20 years studying this land, mapping underground formations, testing water sources. All those rock specimens, all those careful notes, they weren't just a hobby. Noah joined her at the window. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying Samuel believed this land held something valuable, something worth fighting for." Sarah turned to face him. "He left boxes of research in the library basement. Maps, surveys, water analysis reports. He made me promise that if anything happened to him, I'd make sure the right person saw them." "And you think I'm the right person?" Sarah's smile was enigmatic, Samuel did. Said the carter's stubbornness might finally serve a useful purpose. She moved toward the door, then paused. Noah, don't let them intimidate you. This place, it's worth more than they know, more than anyone knows. After she left, Noah and Ellie stood in the gathering dusk of their new home. The farmhouse creaked around them, settling into evening like an old man easing into familiar clothes. Somewhere in the walls, mice scurried. The refrigerator hummed with the irregular rhythm of machinery held together by habit rather than engineering. But there was something else in the silence here, a sense of potential, of secrets waiting to be discovered. Noah thought about Samuel's workshop, about the careful precision of those tools, about the rock specimens labeled with dates and locations spanning decades. "Daddy," Ellie tugged at his hand, "are we really going to stay?" Noah looked down at his daughter, this brave little girl who'd already lost so much and faced it with such grace. In her eyes, he saw not fear but adventure, not desperation but hope. "Yes, sweetheart," he said, the decision surprising him with its certainty. "We're going to stay. We're going to fix this place up, and we're going to make it home." As if in response to his words, the old house seemed to exhale around the long, slow breath that spoke of patience rewarded and purposes about to unfold. 3 days into their new life, Noah stood in the kitchen, holding a sledgehammer and questioning every decision that had brought him to this moment. The wall between the kitchen and what Samuel had used as a study showed clear signs of water-damaged brown stains that spread like old bruises across the faded wallpaper. If he was going to make this house livable for Ellie, the wall had to come down. "Stand back, sweetheart," he called to his daughter, who was sorting through Samuel's book collection in the living room. "Daddy's about to make some noise." The first swing sent vibrations through his arms and released a shower of plaster dust. The second opened a hole large enough to peer through. Noah expected to find standard wall construction studs and insulation, maybe some evidence of the leak that had caused the damage. Instead, he found an envelope. It was tucked between the studs in a plastic bag, protected from moisture and time. Noah's hands trembled slightly as he worked it free. The envelope bore his name in Samuel's careful handwriting, along with a date from 6 months ago, long before Samuel's death, as if he'd known Noah would eventually stand in this exact spot, sledgehammer in hand. Inside was a single sheet of paper and what appeared to be a professional geological survey. The letterhead read, "Kentucky Geological Survey," and was signed by Dr. Marcus Webb, state geologist. Noah's eyes skimmed the technical language, catching fragments that made his pulse quicken. Significant aquifer, exceptional purity, estimated flow rate, and at the bottom, a handwritten note that made him sink into Samuel's kitchen chair. "Mr. Carter, your land sits atop one of the most significant freshwater reserves I've documented in 30 years of geological work. The water table extends approximately 300 feet below surface, with mineral content suggesting natural filtration through limestone formations. Conservative estimates suggest this aquifer could supply clean water to a community of 50 people indefinitely. I strongly recommend further testing. This discovery could be extraordinarily valuable." The letter that accompanied the survey was in Samuel's handwriting, dated just weeks before his death. "Noah, if you're reading this, then you've started the work I always hoped you would. I've watched you from afar, son. Watched you struggle and fight and never give up, especially when it came to that little girl of yours. The Carter stubbornness runs deep in you, and for once, that's exactly what this situation needs. I bought this land 40 years ago because something about it called to me. Took me 20 years to understand what that something was. This house sits on water, Noah. Not just any water, pure, clean, life-giving water that could change everything for a lot of people, but there are folks who'd rather see it bottled and sold than used for the good it could do. I'm leaving this place to you because I believe you're the kind of man who'll do right by it. The surveys are just the beginning. There's more to find, more to understand. Sarah Chen at the library has been helping me research the legal aspects. She's good people, and she knows more than she lets on. Don't let them scare you off, son. What's under this ground is worth fighting for. Noah read the letter 3 times before the words fully penetrated. He looked around the modest kitchenette, the cracked linoleum, the ancient appliances, the water stains that had led to this discovery, and tried to reconcile it with the scientific language of the Geological Survey. His phone rang, interrupting his stunned contemplation. The caller ID showed his ex-wife's number. Jessica. "Noah, we need to talk." Her voice carried a tension he recognized from their marriage's final months. "My parents' attorney wants to schedule a meeting. They're filing for emergency custody unless you agree to reasonable living arrangements for Ellie." "Emergency custody?" Noah gripped the phone tighter. "On what grounds?" "They drove by the house yesterday. The roof has holes, Noah. The front steps are rotting. They have photos." Noah looked through the kitchen window at the barn, where part of the roof had indeed collapsed during the previous night's rain. "Jessica, I'm fixing the place up. It just takes time." "Time we don't have. They're saying you're endangering Ellie by keeping her in a structure that's not fit for habitation." Jessica's voice softened slightly. "Noah, I don't want this fight, but they're not wrong about the condition of that house. Give me 2 weeks." "They won't wait 2 weeks. They're talking about filing papers tomorrow." A pause. "Noah, maybe you should consider their offer. Ellie could stay with them during the week, visit you on weekends, at least until you get the house in better shape." The suggestion hit like a physical blow. Weekends. He'd become a weekend father to his own daughter, the kind of arrangement that slowly eroded the bond between parent and child until visits became obligation rather than joy. "No." The word came out harder than he'd intended. "Ellie stays with me." "Then you better figure out how to make that house safe, fast." After Jessica hung up, Noah sat in the silence of Samuel's kitchen, the Geological Survey spread before him like a treasure map. Outside, Ellie's laughter drifted through the window as she chased a butterfly through the overgrown yard. The sound was pure joy, untainted by custody battles or geological surveys or the weight of impossible decisions. He thought about the Whitman's attorney, about emergency custody petitions and photographs of roof damage. Then he looked again at Dr. Webb's assessment. Extraordinarily valuable. If the water under his land was as significant as the survey suggested, it changed everything. But Noah was a carpenter, not a geologist. He understood wood and nails and the satisfaction of building something solid with his hands. Water tables and aquifers and mineral content were beyond his expertise. He needed help. Sarah Chen answered her cell phone on the second ring. "I was wondering when you'd call." "You knew about the survey." "Samuel made me promise not to say anything unless you found it yourself. He was very specific about that." Her voice carried a mixture of relief and anticipation. "Where did you find it?" "In the kitchen wall." "Sarah, is this real? Could there really be water under here worth—" He glanced at the survey again. "Worth what this suggests." Samuel was brilliant, Noah. Self-taught, but he understood geology better than most people with degrees. And he was careful every measurement verified, every test repeated. If Dr. Webb confirmed Samuel's findings, then yes, it's real. Noah walked to the window, watching Ellie explore the yard with the fearless curiosity of childhood. "The Whitmans are filing for custody. They say the house isn't safe." "When?" "Tomorrow, maybe the day after." Sarah was quiet for a long moment. "Noah, there's something else you should know. Samuel wasn't the only one interested in this land. About 6 months ago, representatives from a development company came around asking questions. They wanted to buy properties in this area for what they called agricultural development. Samuel refused to meet with them." "What kind of development company?" "The kind that bottles water and sells it to the highest bidder. The kind that would drain an aquifer dry if it meant profit." Sarah's voice hardened. "Samuel believed this water was meant to serve the community, not corporate interests. That's why he spent so much time researching water rights and environmental protection laws." Through the window, Noah watched his daughter discover something in the tall grass, probably another of Samuel's rock specimens. Her delighted cry of, "Daddy, look," carried across the yard. "Sarah, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me. Always." If I fight this, the custody battle, trying to save this place, protecting whatever's under the ground, what are my chances? The pause stretched long enough that Noah wondered if the call had dropped. Against the Whitmans and their money? Against a development company with lawyers and political connections? Honestly? Sarah's voice was gentle but direct. Not good. Unless. Unless what? Unless you're willing to fight smarter than they expect. Samuel left more than just that survey, Noah. He left a plan. That evening, after Ellie had fallen asleep in what was now her bedroom, Samuel's former study, which Noah had hastily converted with an air mattress and some of her favorite books, Noah sat in his uncle's workshop among the carefully arranged tools. The geological survey lay on the workbench, illuminated by the warm glow of an old desk lamp. He thought about his conversation with Sarah, about Samuel's plan that she'd promised to show him tomorrow. He thought about the Whitman's attorney and emergency custody hearings and his daughter's trusting smile when she'd kissed him goodnight. Most of all, he thought about the water flowing somewhere beneath his feet, clean, pure water that could change lives if it fell into the right hands, or disappear into corporate profit if it didn't. Noah picked up one of Samuel's chisels, feeling its perfect balance in his hand. His uncle had been a craftsman who understood that the best work required patience, precision, and the courage to see a project through to completion. Tomorrow, Noah would begin to understand what Samuel had really left him. Tonight, he would plan. The old farmhouse settled around him with its familiar creaks and sighs, and somewhere in those sounds, Noah heard something new, not the groaning of a structure ready to collapse, but the whisper of secrets ready to be revealed. The next morning brought Sarah Chen to Noah's doorstep before he'd finished his first cup of coffee. She carried a leather satchel that looked as old as the farmhouse itself and wore the expression of someone who'd spent the night planning strategy. "Ellie's still sleeping?" she asked, glancing toward the stairs. "Like a rock. She's been exploring so much, she's worn herself out." Noah led her to the kitchen table, where the geological survey still lay spread like evidence of a crime. "You said Samuel left a plan." Sarah opened the satchel and withdrew a collection of hand-drawn maps that made Noah's breath catch. These weren't the rough sketches of an amateur, but the precise work of someone who understood both artistry and science. Property lines were marked in blue ink, elevation changes shown with careful shading, and throughout it all, flowing like veins through the landscape, were thin red lines that seemed to pulse with life. "Water flow patterns," Sarah explained, tracing one of the red lines with her finger. "Samuel spent 15 years mapping every spring, every seasonal stream, every place where water came to the surface on this property and the surrounding land." The main map showed not just Noah's inherited property, but the entire watershed, hundreds of acres, stretching from the ridgeline down to the valley where the town of Cedar Falls had grown up around what was once a mill pond. The red lines converged beneath Noah's farmhouse like tributaries flowing toward a great river. He was tracking the source, Noah said, understanding beginning to dawn. "More than that, look at these dates," Sarah pointed to small notations along the water lines. Some went back 20 years, others were as recent as last spring. Samuel was documenting seasonal variations, rainfall patterns, even changes in mineral content based on the time of year. A second map showed something that made Noah's heart race. Property ownership boundaries were overlaid on the water flow patterns, and it became clear that while several landowners sat above the aquifer, Noah's property was positioned at what appeared to be the primary recharge point, where surface water entered the underground system. "This is why they want the land," Sarah said quietly. "Whoever controls the recharge point controls access to the entire aquifer." Noah studied the maps, seeing his uncle's vision take shape. Samuel wasn't just a rock collector, he was documenting water rights. Kentucky water law is complicated, but Samuel understood it better than most lawyers. Surface water belongs to whoever owns the land where it flows. But groundwater, especially when it crosses property lines, that's different. The person who can prove they're protecting the source, who's acting as a responsible steward, has significant legal standing. She pulled out a third map, this one showing projected development patterns. Corporate logos were sketched in the margins, companies Noah didn't recognize, but whose names suggested big money and bigger appetites. Samuel believed they'd been planning this for years. Buy up properties one by one, drill extraction wells, and turn the aquifer into a commercial water source. A few landowners make quick money, the companies make massive profits, and in 20 years the aquifer is depleted. Noah thought about Dr. Webb's assessment that the water could supply 50 people indefinitely, unless someone protects it, unless someone fights for it. Sarah's eyes met his. Samuel chose you because he believed you'd fight. The sound of small feet on the stairs announced Ellie's arrival. She appeared in the kitchen wearing yesterday's clothes and sporting hair that defied gravity, but her smile was bright enough to power the house. "Good morning, Miss Sarah," she said with the careful politeness Noah had taught her. "Are you looking at Daddy's treasure maps?" Sarah's expression softened. "Something like that, sweetheart. Your Uncle Samuel was very good at finding hidden treasures." While Ellie ate breakfast, Sarah showed Noah the most detailed of Samuel's Mapsa cross-section view that revealed the underground structure like a cave system made of water. The aquifer stretched deep into the earth, held in place by layers of limestone and shale that had taken millions of years to form. "The geology is perfect," Sarah explained. "Natural filtration through limestone, protection from surface contamination, and a recharge rate that's sustainable indefinitely as long as the extraction doesn't exceed the inflow." "How do you know so much about this?" Noah asked. Sarah hesitated, then seemed to come to a decision. "I have a master's degree in environmental geology from the University of Kentucky. I came to Cedar Falls 12 years ago to work for the State Geological Survey, but I got tired of watching good science get buried under political pressure. The library job was supposed to be temporary. But you stayed." "I stayed because Samuel convinced me that sometimes the most important work happens quietly, away from committees and bureaucrats." She folded the maps carefully. "He was preparing for this fight long before he got sick. He knew he wouldn't live to see it through, but he believed the right person would come along." Noah's phone buzzed with a text message from Jessica. "Attorney meeting moved to this afternoon, 2 p.m. at their office. They want to discuss settlement." He showed the message to Sarah, who frowned. "Settlement means they're hoping to avoid court. That's good, it gives us time." "Time for what?" "To prove you're not just a desperate father trying to make a condemned house habitable. To prove you're a responsible landowner, protecting a valuable natural resource." Sarah gathered the maps. "Samuel left detailed instructions, Noah. Not just about the water, but about how to fight for it legally." They spent the next hour going through Samuel's research. Hidden in boxes throughout the house were property surveys going back to the original land grants, historical documents about water usage in the area, and correspondence with environmental lawyers who specialized in groundwater protection. Most importantly, Samuel had begun the process of having the aquifer designated as a protected watershed. The paperwork was incomplete. He'd died before filing the final documents, but the groundwork was solid. "If we can prove the aquifer deserves protection and that you're the right person to protect it, it changes everything," Sarah explained. "You're not just a broke single father living in a deteriorating house. You're the steward of a natural resource worth millions." Noah looked around the kitchen where he'd made this discovery, at the water-stained walls that had hidden the first piece of the puzzle. "What do I need to do?" "First, we finish Samuel's application for watershed protection. I can help with the technical aspects. Second, we document your commitment to the property, show that you're making real improvements, that this isn't just a desperate attempt to avoid losing custody. And third," Sarah's smile was sharp, "we make sure certain interested parties understand that this aquifer isn't for sale." That afternoon, while Ellie played in the yard under Sarah's watchful eye, Noah drove to town for the meeting with the Whitman's attorney. The law office occupied a restored Victorian house on Main Street, all polished wood and expensive furniture, designed to impress and intimidate. Robert Whitman rose from a leather chair as Noah entered, his handshake brief and cold. Margaret remained seated, her expression suggesting she'd smelled something unpleasant. The attorney, a thin man named Harrison, who wore his authority like expensive cologne, gestured Noah to a chair, facing them across a mahogany conference table. "Let's dispense with pleasantries," Harrison began. "My clients are concerned about their granddaughter's welfare. The property you've taken her to is, frankly, uninhabitable. I'm making improvements. Cosmetic repairs to a fundamentally unsound structure." Harrison opened a file folder and spread photographs across the table. They showed the farmhouse's worst angles: the sagging porch, the damaged roof, the overgrown yard that looked more like abandoned land than a home. Margaret leaned forward. "Noah, look at these pictures. Really look at them. Is this where you want Ellie to grow up?" The photographs stung because they weren't inaccurate. The farmhouse did look rough, especially compared to the Whitmans' manicured suburban home with its swimming pool and professionally landscaped yard. But they didn't show Ellie's delight in discovering Samuel's rock collection, or the way she'd claimed the workshop stool as her own special place, or the careful way she'd arranged her few belongings in what she now called my room. "The house has good bones," Noah said. "It just needs work." "Work you can't afford," Robert stated flatly. "We've looked into your finances, Noah. You're 3 months behind on credit card payments, you have no steady income, and your truck has been repossessed twice." Harrison leaned back in his chair. "However, my clients are prepared to be reasonable. They're offering a compromise that serves everyone's interests." He slid a document across the table. Noah scanned the legal language, his heart sinking with each paragraph. "Temporary custody," Harrison explained. "Ellie would live with the Whitmans during the school, year-stable housing, excellent educational opportunities, proper medical care. You'd have liberal visitation rights, and if you can demonstrate financial stability and suitable housing within 2 years, we'd revisit the arrangement." 2 years. By then, Ellie would be 10 years old, settled into a routine that didn't include daily time with her father. The Whitmans would become her primary family, and Noah would become the weekend visitor in his daughter's life. "And if I refuse?" Margaret's voice was gentle but firm. "Then we file for permanent custody on grounds of endangerment and neglect. Noah, we don't want to destroy you. We want what's best for Ellie." Noah thought about Samuel's maps, about the water flowing beneath his feet, about the plans Sarah had promised to help him execute. He thought about his daughter's trust and his uncle's faith in the Carter stubbornness. "I need time to consider this." 24 hours, Harrison said. "After that, we proceed with filing." Noah left the law office feeling like he'd been in a boxing match with opponents who outweighed him by 50 pounds each. But as he drove back to the farmhouse, something Sarah had said earlier echoed in his mind. "You're not just a broke single father living in a deteriorating house. You're the steward of a natural resource worth millions." The question was whether he could prove it in 24 hours. When he arrived home, he found Ellie and Sarah in the workshop, where his daughter was carefully arranging Samuel's smallest tools on the child-sized workbench. She looked up as he entered, her face bright with the kind of pure happiness that came from feeling truly at home. "Daddy, Miss Sarah showed me how Uncle Samuel marked all his special rocks. Want to see?" Looking at his daughter's joy, Noah made his decision. Some things were worth fighting for, even against impossible odds. The discovery in Samuel's attic came at dawn, when Noah couldn't sleep and decided to tackle the house's most neglected spaces. He'd been working by flashlight, clearing away decades of accumulated boxes and forgotten furniture, when his beam caught something that didn't belong among the dust and cobwebs. It was a surveyor's Transiton antique brass instrument that looked like a small telescope mounted on a tripod. But this wasn't some garage sale find or nostalgic decoration. The brass gleamed with the patina of use, and the precision of its construction spoke of serious professional equipment. Noah lifted it carefully, surprised by its weight and the smoothness of its moving parts. Everything about the instrument suggested it had been maintained with the same care Samuel had shown his woodworking tools. A leather case beside it contained additional eyepieces, measuring chains, and what appeared to be field notebooks filled with calculations and sketches. "You found it," Sarah's voice came from behind him. She'd arrived early, as had become her habit, bringing coffee and the kind of quiet determination that made impossible tasks seem merely difficult. "Found what exactly?" "Samuel's transit. He bought it from a retiring surveyor 30 years ago. Taught himself to use it by measuring every inch of this property." Sarah climbed the attic steps, moving carefully around the accumulated clutter. He was completely self-trained, but his measurements were as accurate as any professional survey. Noah opened one of the field notebooks, squinting at Samuel's precise handwriting in the dim light. The pages were filled with elevation readings, compass bearings, and sketches that showed the property from every conceivable angle. Why would he need this level of detail? Because he was building a legal case. Sarah pointed to a series of calculations that covered an entire page. Water rights in Kentucky depend on proving beneficial use and reasonable stewardship. Samuel was documenting everything: where water entered the property, how it moved underground, what happened to it when it left. They carried the transit downstairs, where morning light revealed its true craftsmanship. The instrument bore the maker's mark of a 1940s surveying company, and every brass fitting had been kept polished and calibrated. "Miss Sarah," Ellie appeared in the kitchen doorway, still in her pajamas but wide awake with curiosity. "What's that pretty thing?" "It's called a transit, sweetheart," Sarah explained. "Your Uncle Samuel used it to measure the land and make very precise maps." Ellie approached the instrument with the careful reverence she showed all of Samuel's tools. "Did he look through it like a telescope?" "Something like that. Would you like to see how it works?" While Sarah showed Ellie the basics of the transit, Noah studied the field notebooks. Samuel's observations went back decades, recording seasonal changes in water flow, variations in mineral content, and detailed measurements of elevation and distance. It was the work of someone building an irrefutable scientific case. One entry, dated just 6 months before Samuel's death, caught Noah's attention. Water table dropped 3.2 feet from previous year. Drought conditions account for some variation, but extraction from neighboring properties increasing. Miller Farm sold to Agricultural Development Company last month. Suspect new irrigation wells drawing from same aquifer. Time running short to establish protection. Sarah noticed Noah's frown. He knew they were closing in. The development companies have been buying properties around here for 2 years, always claiming it's for agricultural use. But Samuel tracked the water levels and knew what was really happening. Industrial extraction. On a scale that would drain the aquifer within a decade. Sarah's voice carried the frustration of someone who'd watched good science be ignored. Samuel tried to interest the State Geological Survey, but political pressure kept killing any serious investigation. Noah's phone buzzed with a text from Jessica. "Mom wants to take Ellie shopping for school clothes this afternoon. Says it would be good for her to see what normal life looks like." The message stung, carrying the implication that life with Noah was somehow abnormal, but it also reminded him that he had less than 12 hours before the Whitmans expected his answer to their custody proposal. "Sarah, you said Samuel had a plan. What exactly did he want me to do?" She pulled out a manila folder that had been tucked inside the transit case. "Finish what he started. Complete the watershed protection application, document your stewardship of the property, and force a legal challenge that exposes what the development companies are really doing." The folder contained partially completed forms for the Kentucky Environmental Protection Cabinet, along with supporting documentation that represented years of careful research. Samuel had identified every legal precedent, every regulatory requirement, every procedural step necessary to have the aquifer designated as a protected water source. "But you'd have to prove you're serious about protection," Sarah continued. "Not just filing paperwork, but demonstrating actual stewardship. Sustainable practices, environmental monitoring, community benefit." Noah looked around the kitchen, with its water-stained walls and ancient appliances. "How am I supposed to prove stewardship when I can barely keep the roof from falling in?" by showing that you understand what's at stake, by making the improvements that matter most for water protection, not just cosmetic fixes. Sarah spread Samuel's maps on the table. "Look at this." She pointed to an area behind the house where Samuel had marked several springs. Natural recharge points. Right now they're contaminated by runoff from the old septic system and agricultural chemicals from the previous owner. Samuel designed a filtration system that would clean the recharge water and protect the aquifer. Designed it? Complete engineering plans. He was going to build it himself before he got sick. Sarah's finger traced lines on the map that showed a system of settling ponds, natural filters, and controlled drainage. It would cost maybe $5,000 in materials, but it would demonstrate real environmental protection. $5,000 might as well have been $50,000 given Noah's financial situation, but as he studied Samuel's careful plans, an idea began to form. These materials, gravel, sand, PVC pipe, concrete, I could source most of it locally, maybe even used. You're thinking like a carpenter. I am a carpenter, and carpenters know how to build things that work, even on tight budgets. Noah traced the filtration system's path. Samuel designed this, but I could build it. Properly built, it would last decades. Sarah's smile was the first genuinely hopeful expression he'd seen from her. If you could pull that off, complete the environmental protection while improving the property, it would completely change your legal position. They spent the next hour going through Samuel's engineering plans. The filtration system was elegant in its simplicity, using gravity flow and natural materials to clean water before it entered the aquifer. It was exactly the kind of project that played to Noah's strengths, practical construction that served a larger purpose. "There's one more thing," Sarah said, pulling out a letter from the bottom of the folder. Samuel was in contact with an environmental law firm in Lexington. They specialize in groundwater protection cases, and they work on contingency for clients who can demonstrate legitimate stewardship. The letter was from attorney Maria Santos, expressing interest in Samuel's case and offering to represent him if he decided to challenge corporate extraction rights. She'd included her card with a handwritten note, "Water belongs to the community, not the highest bidder." Noah felt something shift inside him, a sense of possibility that had been absent since the day he'd lost his construction job. This wasn't just about keeping Ellie with him anymore. It was about protecting something that mattered, something that could benefit generations of people if it fell into the right hands. "Sarah, if I do this, if I try to build Samuel's filtration system and complete the protection application, what are my real chances?" She was quiet for a long moment, studying the maps spread across the table. "Against the Whitman's money and the development company's lawyers? Honestly, I don't know. But I know what happens if you don't try. The aquifer gets sold to the highest bidder, the water disappears into corporate profits, and in 20 years this whole area becomes another place where communities died because their natural resources were strip-mined." Through the kitchen window, Noah watched Ellie exploring the yard, collecting rocks and arranging them in patterns that made sense only to her. She moved with the confidence of a child who felt safe and loved, who trusted that the adults in her life would protect what mattered most. That afternoon, while Ellie was in town with Jessica and the Whitmans, Noah and Sarah walked the property with Samuel's transit and field notebooks. Using the antique instrument, they verified Samuel's measurements and documented the current condition of the natural springs that fed the aquifer. "The contamination is worse than Samuel thought," Sarah observed, testing water samples from the main spring. "Agricultural runoff has increased the nitrate levels significantly, which makes the filtration system even more important." "Exactly. If you can demonstrate that you're actively improving water quality while the development companies are degrading it, you have a strong legal argument for stewardship rights." As they worked, Noah began to see the property through Samuel's eyes. This wasn't just a rundown farmhouse on neglected land. It was the keystone of an entire ecosystem, the point where surface water entered an underground river that could serve thousands of people. But it was also a battleground. The development companies had been positioning themselves for years, buying properties and establishing extraction rights. Samuel had been the obstacle they couldn't remove through purchase or pressure, so they'd waited for time to solve their problem. They hadn't counted on Noah. That evening, as Ellie told him about her day in town, "Grammy bought me 3 new dresses, but I told her I liked my old clothes better." Noah made his decision. He called the Whitman's attorney and left a message. "I'm declining your custody arrangement. Ellie stays with me." Then he called Maria Santos, the environmental lawyer, and left another message. "I'm Samuel Carter's nephew. I'd like to discuss finishing what he started." Finally, he sat down with Samuel's engineering plans and began making lists of materials needed, suppliers to contact, work that could be done immediately versus projects that would take weeks. Building the filtration system wouldn't just improve the property, it would prove that Noah understood what he'd inherited and was willing to fight to protect it. The question was whether he could build it fast enough to matter. In the growing darkness, the old farmhouse settled around them with its familiar creaks and sighs. But tonight, those sounds seemed different to Noah. Not the groaning of a structure ready to collapse, but the whisper of something ancient and patient, waiting for the right person to unlock its secrets. Outside, the springs that fed the aquifer continued their eternal work, carrying clean water down through limestone and time toward an uncertain future. Tomorrow, Noah would begin the work of making sure that future served the people who needed it most. The envelope arrived on a Tuesday morning, delivered by a process server who looked apologetic as he handed Noah the legal documents. Inside were the official papers the Whitmans had promised. A petition for emergency custody based on unsafe living conditions and financial instability, accompanied by a court date just 2 weeks away. But tucked between the legal filings was something Noah hadn't expected. A second envelope containing what appeared to be a historical land deed, yellowed with age and bearing official seals from the Commonwealth of Kentucky. Noah spread the documents on Samuel's kitchen table, his hands trembling slightly as he realized what he was looking at. The deed, dated 1887, established not just property ownership, but something called perpetual water rights for the land that now included his farmhouse. "Sarah needs to see this," he muttered, reaching for his phone. She arrived within 20 minutes, bringing with her a magnifying glass and the kind of focused intensity Noah had learned to associate with important discoveries. Sarah examined the deed carefully, paying particular attention to the legal language and official stamps. "This changes everything," she said finally. "Noah, this document establishes water rights that predate modern extraction laws. It means your property has legal claim to the water that flows beneath it, regardless of who owns the surrounding land." "But how did it end up with the custody papers?" Sarah's expression darkened. "Someone wanted you to have it. Someone who knew the Whitman's attorney would file today and wanted to make sure you understood what you're really fighting for." The implication hung between them like smoke. Someone with access to legal filings and historical records had deliberately ensured Noah would see this deed at exactly the right moment. "Maria Santos," Noah said, understanding. The environmental lawyer Samuel contacted. His phone rang as if summoned by his words. The caller ID showed a Lexington number. "Mr. Carter, this is Maria Santos. I believe you received some interesting reading material this morning." Maria's voice carried the confidence of someone accustomed to complex legal battles. She explained that she'd been investigating the development company's land acquisitions and had discovered the historical deed in the county records office. "Your Uncle Samuel was right to be concerned," she said. 3 different corporations have been buying properties around your land, and they're all subsidiaries of the same parent company, Clearwater Development Group. They've done this before in other states, always following the same pattern, which is buy up properties around a water source, establish extraction rights, then pressure the key landowner to sell. If pressure doesn't work, they find legal ways to force a sale tax assessments, environmental violations, anything that makes ownership too expensive to maintain. Noah looked around the kitchen with its peeling wallpaper and ancient appliances. They don't need legal pressure. This place is falling apart on its own. That's exactly what they're counting on, Maria said. But the water rights deed changes the equation. If you can prove you're acting as a responsible steward of the water source, those historical rights give you significant legal protection. After the call ended, Sarah helped Noah understand the full implications of the deed. The 1,887 document didn't just establish water rights, it created what amounted to a conservation easement, requiring the landowner to protect the water source for the benefit of present and future generations. Samuel knew about this, Sarah said, tracing the deed's ornate legal language with her finger. He had to have known. That's why he was so meticulous about documenting sustainable practices, and why he left the property to me instead of selling it. Exactly. He needed someone who would honor the conservation requirement, not just cash out to the highest bidder. That afternoon brought unexpected visitors, not the Whitmans this time, but two men in expensive suits who introduced themselves as representatives of Clearwater Development Group. The older man, who gave his name as Charles Morrison, had the polished appearance of someone accustomed to making deals that left everyone happy, at least on the surface. "Mr. Carter, we understand you've inherited some challenging property," Morrison began, his tone sympathetic but businesslike. "We'd like to discuss how we might be able to help." They sat on Samuel's front porch, where the sagging boards creaked ominously under their weight. Morrison's companion, a younger man named Derek, took notes on a tablet while Morrison outlined their proposal. "Clearwater specializes in agricultural development," Morrison explained. "We help landowners maximize the value of underutilized property through sustainable farming practices and water management systems." "What kind of water management?" Noah asked. "Modern irrigation systems, primarily. We install wells and distribution networks that help farmers make the most of their water resources." Morrison gestured toward the overgrown fields behind the house. "Property like this could support a significant agricultural operation with the right infrastructure." Derek showed Noah photographs on his tablet, neat rows of crops, efficient irrigation systems, and what appeared to be profitable farming operations. It all looked impressive and professional. "We're prepared to offer you $200,000 for the property," Morrison said. "Cash with a 30-day closing. That would give you the resources to provide proper housing for your daughter and put this unfortunate situation behind you." $200,000. It was more money than Noah had ever imagined having, enough to buy a decent house in town and maybe start a small construction business. Enough to end the custody battle and give Ellie the stability everyone said she needed. "I'll need to think about it," Noah said. Morrison's smile remained friendly, but something harder flickered in his eyes. "Of course, but I should mention that our offer has a time limit. Market conditions change, and opportunities like this don't last indefinitely." After they left, Noah sat alone on the porch, staring at the business card Morrison had given him. $200,000 would solve all his immediate problems. It would also ensure that the aquifer Samuel had spent decades protecting would be drained within 10 years. When Ellie returned from school, she found her father in Samuel's workshop, studying the engineering plans for the water filtration system. She climbed onto a special stool and watched him work, her presence a quiet comfort in the gathering twilight. "Daddy, are we going to stay here forever? Would you like to?" Ellie considered the question with the seriousness she brought to all important matters. "I like it here. It feels like Uncle Samuel is still taking care of us, even though he's gone." That evening, Sarah returned with news that made Noah's decision even more complicated. She'd spent the afternoon researching Clearwater Development Group and their parent company, Aquatic Resources International. "They're not agricultural developers," she said, spreading printouts across the kitchen table. "They're water extraction specialists. They've drained aquifers in 3 other states, always using the same play: book buy the land, pump the water, sell it to municipalities and bottling companies, then move on when the well runs dry." The documents Sarah had found painted a troubling picture. In Colorado, Clearwater had extracted so much water from an underground source that neighboring wells had gone dry. In Arizona, they'd left behind contaminated soil and legal battles that were still ongoing 5 years later. The $200,000 they offered? Sarah pointed to a financial report. They'll make that back in the first 6 months of operation. The aquifer under this property is worth at least $50 million to them, probably more. Noah thought about Morrison's friendly demeanor and Derek's professional presentation. They seem legitimate. They are legitimate in the sense that what they do is legal. But legal doesn't mean right. Sarah's voice carried the frustration of someone who'd watched corporate interests override community needs too many times. Noah, once they start extraction, there's no going back. The water will be gone, and communities like Cedar Falls will be left to find new sources or watch their towns die. That night, after Ellie had gone to bed, Noah walked the property with a flashlight, following the path of Samuel's Springs toward the main recharge area. The sound of flowing water was subtle but constant, a whisper that spoke of abundance and continuity. He thought about the water rights deed, about Samuel's decades of careful stewardship, about the engineering plans that could protect this resource for future generations. He also thought about the custody battle looming in less than 2 weeks, about his daughter's need for stability, about the practical reality of choosing between idealism and survival. At the main spring, Noah knelt and cupped the clear water in his hands. It was cool and clean, tasting of limestone and thyme. This was what Samuel had protected, what Clearwater wanted to own, what the community needed to survive. But it was also what stood between Noah and the resources he needed to keep his daughter. Standing in the darkness beside the spring that fed the aquifer, Noah understood that his next decision would determine not just his family's future, but the fate of water that had been flowing through this land since before humans walked the earth. The sound of the spring seemed to grow louder in the silence, as if the water itself was waiting to learn whether it would continue its ancient journey toward the community that depended on it, or disappear into corporate pipelines that would carry it toward distant profits. Tomorrow, Noah would have to choose which future he was willing to fight for. The manila envelope that arrived the next morning contained no return address, but its contents made Noah's hands shake as he spread the documents across Samuel's kitchen table. Environmental impact studies, dated just 3 months ago, showing the devastating effects of industrial water extraction on ecosystems throughout the region. The studies were official, bearing the seal of the Kentucky Environmental Protection Cabinet, but they'd been marked confidential and not for public release. Someone had taken considerable risk to ensure Noah saw them. Sarah arrived to find him poring over charts and graphs that painted a grim picture of corporate water extraction throughout Kentucky. Aquifers that had sustained communities for generations were being depleted at alarming rates, leaving behind contaminated soil and dried wells. "Where did these come from?" she asked, examining the official stamps and signatures. "I don't know, but look at this." Noah pointed to a study of a town called Millfield, about 60 miles southeast. Clearwater drained their aquifer in 18 months. The whole community had to relocate. The Millfield study included photographs that made Noah's stomach clench. Dried wells, cracked earth where springs had once flowed, and abandoned houses that spoke of a community that had simply ceased to exist when its water disappeared. "This is what they want to do here," Sarah said quietly. "Turn Cedar Falls into another Millfield." Noah's phone rang, Maria Santos calling with an update on the legal situation. "I've been digging into Clearwater's operations," she said without preamble. "They're moving faster than usual on this acquisition. My sources suggest they're under pressure from investors to show quick returns." "What kind of pressure?" "The kind that makes them willing to take legal risks they might normally avoid. I think we can use that to our advantage, but only if you're committed to fighting this through." Maria explained that environmental law offered several avenues for protecting the aquifer, but all of them required Noah to demonstrate active stewardship of the water source. The filtration system Samuel had designed would be a crucial piece of evidence, but it had to be built and operational before the custody hearing. 2 weeks isn't much time," Maria said. "Can you pull it off?" Noah looked at Samuel's engineering plans, mentally calculating materials and labor. I'll have to. After the call ended, Sarah revealed something she'd been holding back. Noah, there's something you should know about my connection to Samuel. We weren't just research partners, we were planning to get married. The admission hung in the kitchen air like morning mist. Sarah's eyes held a mixture of grief and determination that explained her fierce commitment to protecting Samuel's legacy. He proposed last spring, right after the doctor told him about the cancer, said he didn't have time for a long engagement. Her voice carried the weight of loss still fresh enough to ache. We were going to fight Clearwater together, turn this place into a model for sustainable water management. Sarah, I'm sorry, I didn't know. He chose you because he believed you'd finish what we started. Not because you were family, but because you're the kind of man who fights for what matters, even when the odds are impossible. That afternoon brought more visitors, but these were welcomed ones. Word had somehow spread through Cedar Falls about Noah's situation, and people began arriving with offers of help that surprised him with their generosity. Tom Henderson, who ran the local hardware store, showed up with a truck full of PVC pipe and fittings. Samuel Carter was a good man, he said simply. Heard you might need some materials for a water project. Jenny Martinez, who taught at the elementary school, brought a casserole and an offer to tutor Ellie if the custody battle dragged on. That little girl deserves to stay with her father, she said firmly. Even Bill Watson, who owned the feed store and had initially been skeptical of the city fellow who'd inherited Samuel's place, arrived with a load of gravel and sand. Samuel always said this land was special, he told Noah. Maybe it's time we found out why. By evening, Noah had enough donated materials to begin construction of the filtration system. More importantly, he had something he hadn't expected: community support from people who understood what was at stake. As neighbors worked together to unload supplies, Ellie moved among them with the easy confidence of a child who felt truly welcomed. She helped carry smaller items, asked questions about the filtration system, and charmed everyone with her earnest desire to help protect Uncle Samuel's special water. Look at her, Sarah said, watching Ellie explain the project to Mrs. Patterson from the post office. She understands what this means better than most adults. That night, after the volunteers had gone home and Ellie was asleep, Noah and Sarah sat in Samuel's workshop planning the construction sequence. The filtration system would require careful coordination excavation, pipe laying, concrete work, and the installation of natural filtering materials in precise layers. The settling pond is the key, Sarah explained, pointing to Samuel's drawings. It has to be positioned to catch runoff from the entire recharge area, but deep enough to allow proper filtration through the gravel beds. I can handle the construction, Noah said, but I'll need help with the technical aspects: flow rates, filtration depths, monitoring systems. Samuel left detailed specifications for everything. He even calculated seasonal variations in water flow and designed the system to handle peak loads during spring runoff. As they worked through the engineering details, Noah began to appreciate the full scope of his uncle's vision. This wasn't just a water filtration system, it was a comprehensive approach to watershed management that could serve as a model for sustainable development throughout the region. Sarah, if we pull this off, if we complete the system and win the legal battle, what happens then? She looked up from the plans, her expression thoughtful. Then we prove that communities can protect their natural resources without sacrificing economic development. We show that there's a better way than corporate extraction and environmental destruction. And Clearwater? They move on to easier targets. Companies like that don't fight battles they can't win quickly. Noah's phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. Saw your lights on. Working late on improvements? Remember our offer expires Friday. Don't let pride cost your daughter her future. The message was unsigned, but Noah had no doubt it came from Clearwater. The implied threat was clear: accept their offer or face the consequences of challenging corporate power. They're getting nervous, Sarah observed, reading over his shoulder. Good. Nervous corporations make mistakes. But Noah was thinking about the deadline. Friday was just 3 days away, and the custody hearing was the following Monday. If he refused Clearwater's offer and lost the court battle, he'd have nothing, no money for legal fees, no stable housing for Ellie, and no way to prevent the aquifer's destruction. "Sarah, I need you to be honest with me. What are the real odds of winning the custody case?" She was quiet for a long moment, studying Samuel's plans. Without the filtration system operational and the watershed protection filing complete, not good. The Whitmans have money, connections, and a house that doesn't leak when it rains. And with the system complete? With the system complete, you're not just a struggling single father anymore. You're an environmental steward protecting a vital natural resource. That changes the entire legal equation. Outside, the sound of Samuel's springs continued their eternal whisper, carrying clean water toward an uncertain future. Noah thought about his daughter sleeping upstairs, about the community members who'd offered their help, about the water that had flowed through this land for thousands of years before corporate extraction had become a threat. He also thought about the practical reality of construction timelines, legal deadlines, and the enormous risk of betting everything on a project he'd never attempted before. But as he looked at Samuel's careful engineering drawings, at the donated materials stacked in the yard, at Sarah's determined expression, Noah realized he'd already made his choice. The filtration system would be built, the watershed protection would be filed, and Clearwater Development Group would learn that some things weren't for sale at any price. The question was whether Noah could complete the work in time to save both the aquifer and his family. The letter was hidden behind a loose board in Samuel's bedroom wall, discovered only when Noah began repairs to fix a leak that had been dripping into Ellie's room below. Unlike the other documents he'd found, this one was sealed in waterproof plastic and marked with his name in Samuel's careful handwriting, along with specific instructions. Open only if Clearwater makes direct contact. Noah's hands trembled as he broke the seal. The letter was dated just 2 weeks before Samuel's death, when the old man would have been weak from chemotherapy, but apparently still sharp enough to anticipate exactly how events would unfold. "My dear Noah," the letter began, "if you're reading this, then Clearwater has shown their hand, and you're facing the choice I hoped you'd never have to make. By now you've discovered the water, met Sarah, and begun to understand what I've left you. But there's more to this story than you know, and you'll need the complete truth to make the decision that's right for your family." Noah sank into Samuel's reading chair, the letter shaking in his hands as he read his uncle's final revelation. "I wasn't just a hobbyist geologist, Noah. For 30 years, I worked for the U.S. Geological Survey, specializing in groundwater analysis and protection. I retired early when I realized how much political pressure was being applied to suppress research that interfered with corporate extraction rights. I came to this farm not to escape the work, but to continue it independently." The letter explained that Samuel had been conducting a covert study of corporate water extraction throughout the southeastern United States, documenting cases where companies had drained aquifers and left communities without sustainable water sources. His research had been funded by a consortium of environmental foundations, and his findings were meant to support federal legislation protecting groundwater resources. "The aquifer under this property isn't just valuable because of its size or purity," Samuel continued. "It's valuable because it's connected to a massive underground system that extends across 3 states. Clearwater doesn't just want to extract water from your land, they want to use it as the central pumping station for the largest water mining operation in U.S. history." Noah read the words twice before their full meaning penetrated. This wasn't about a local aquifer worth $50 million. This was about a regional water system worth billions, with his farmhouse sitting at the critical control point. "The water rights deed you found is real, but it's more powerful than you know. It doesn't just protect your property, it establishes your legal authority over the entire connected aquifer system. If you can prove responsible stewardship, you have the legal standing to challenge Clearwater's extraction rights on all the surrounding properties they've purchased." Sarah's knock at the front door interrupted Noah's reading. He found her standing on the porch with a grim expression and a manila folder that looked ominously official. "We have a problem," she said without preamble. I've been monitoring Clearwater's permit applications, and they just filed for emergency extraction rights. They're claiming drought conditions require immediate access to groundwater reserves. Noah invited her in, his mind still reeling from Samuel's letter. "Sarah, there's something I need to show you." He handed her the letter, watching her expression change as she read Samuel's revelations. When she finished, she sank into the kitchen chair, her face pale. "He never told me about his USGS background," she said quietly. "I knew he was brilliant, but I thought he was self-taught. Did you know about the connected aquifer system? I suspected it from his maps, but I never realized the full scope." Sarah spread her own research materials on the table. "Noah, if Samuel's right about the regional connection, then stopping Clearwater here doesn't just protect Cedar Falls, it protects water supplies for hundreds of thousands of people." The phone rang, interrupting their discussion. The caller ID showed Maria Santos's number. "Noah, we have a serious problem," the environmental lawyer said without preamble. Clearwater just filed an emergency petition claiming that delays in water extraction are threatening agricultural operations throughout the region. They're asking for immediate injunctive relief that would allow them to begin pumping while legal challenges are pending. Can they do that? If they can prove immediate necessity, yes, and they've apparently found a sympathetic judge who's scheduled an emergency hearing for tomorrow morning. Noah felt the careful plans he'd been building collapse around him. What does that mean for the custody case? It means Clearwater is trying to resolve the water issue before your custody hearing on Monday. If they get permission to start extraction, your stewardship argument becomes irrelevant. There won't be any water left to protect. After Maria hung up, Noah and Sarah sat in the kitchen's afternoon light, surrounded by the evidence of Samuel's decades-long investigation. The scope of what they faced had expanded beyond anything Noah had imagined when he'd first discovered the geological survey in the wall. "Sarah, I need to ask you something, and I need complete honesty." She nodded, her expression serious. "Samuel's letter says you knew more about this than you've told me, about his real background, about the scope of the aquifer system, about what Clearwater is really planning." Sarah was quiet for a long moment, her eyes focused on Samuel's maps. "I knew Samuel had professional training. His knowledge was too sophisticated for a hobbyist. But he swore me to secrecy about his USGS background because he was concerned about retaliation." "What kind of retaliation?" "The kind that happens to government scientists who challenge corporate interests. Career destruction, legal harassment, threats to family members." Sarah's voice carried the weight of experience. "Noah, environmental scientists who cross the wrong people sometimes have accidents or find themselves facing federal charges for violating classification protocols. So Samuel was hiding here. Samuel was fighting from here. This farm was never a retreat, it was a fortress." Sarah pulled out a map Noah hadn't seen before, one that showed corporate extraction operations across multiple states. He was building a legal case that would expose the entire industry's systematic destruction of groundwater resources. The map was overwhelming in its scope. Red marks indicated depleted aquifers, blue marks showed active extraction sites, and yellow marks represented planned operations. The pattern was clear, a methodical draining of underground water systems that had taken millennia to develop. "And now they want to make me part of it," Noah said. "They want to neutralize you. The $200,000 offer wasn't a biot, it was a bribe to make you go away quietly." Noah's phone buzzed with another text from the unknown number. "Heard about tomorrow's hearing. Last chance to be reasonable. Think about your daughter's future." This time, the threat was explicit. Accept Clearwater's offer or face the consequences of challenging their emergency extraction petition with insufficient resources and legal support. "Sarah, if we fight this tomorrow and lose, what happens?" "Clearwater starts pumping immediately. The aquifer is depleted within 5 years, and communities throughout the region lose their water supplies." She met his eyes directly. "And you'll likely lose custody of Ellie because you'll be seen as someone who chose an environmental crusade over his daughter's welfare. And if we don't fight, you take their money, move away, and watch from a distance as they destroy everything Samuel spent his life protecting." That evening, after Ellie had gone to bed, Noah walked to the main spring where he'd first understood the scope of what he'd inherited. The water flowed as it had for thousands of years, clear and constant and seemingly eternal. But now he knew that eternity could end tomorrow if a judge decided that corporate profits outweighed environmental protection. He thought about his daughter sleeping upstairs, about the community members who donated materials for the filtration system, about the hundreds of thousands of people whose water supplies depended on the aquifer system beneath his feet. He also thought about Samuel's final letter, tucked safely in his pocket, and the weight of a 30-year investigation that had led to this moment. Standing beside the spring in the gathering darkness, Noah understood that tomorrow's hearing wasn't just about water rights or custody battles. It was about whether communities could protect their natural resources from corporate exploitation, or whether money and political influence would always prevail over environmental stewardship. The sound of flowing water seemed to grow louder in the silence, as if the aquifer itself was waiting to learn its fate. By morning, Noah would have to decide whether he was willing to risk everything, his daughter's custody, his financial security, his quiet life, to fight a battle that Samuel had spent decades preparing for. The water continued its ancient flow, carrying with it the hopes and fears of everyone whose future depended on its protection. Noah woke before dawn on Friday morning, his mind immediately focused on the emergency hearing scheduled for 10 o'clock. On his kitchen table lay Samuel's master blueprint for the sustainable water management system, not just the filtration project Noah had been planning, but a comprehensive design that could protect the entire regional aquifer while providing clean water to communities throughout the area. The blueprint was Samuel's masterpiece, combining 30 years of geological expertise with practical engineering solutions. It showed how the natural recharge points could be enhanced and protected, how extraction could be managed sustainably, and how the water system could serve as the foundation for long-term economic development that benefited communities rather than distant corporations. "It's brilliant," Sarah said, arriving with coffee and the kind of determined energy that comes from knowing you're facing the most important day of your life. "If we can get this in front of the right people, it changes everything. The question is whether we can convince Judge Harrison that there's an alternative to Clearwater's extraction plan." Maria Santos had called at 5:30 with updates on the legal strategy. The emergency hearing would focus on Clearwater's claim that immediate water extraction was necessary to prevent agricultural losses during drought conditions. Noah's team would have to prove that sustainable management could meet the same needs without depleting the aquifer. "The judge is Thomas Harrisono, relation to the Whitman's attorney," Maria had explained. "He's got a reputation for being thorough and fair, but he's also practical. He won't be impressed by environmental arguments that ignore economic realities. So we need to show him that sustainable management is also economically superior." "Exactly, and we need to do it with evidence, not just good intentions." That was where Samuel's blueprint became crucial. The master plan didn't just protect water, it created a sustainable development model that could generate long-term revenue for the entire region while preserving the aquifer for future generations. As Sarah helped Noah prepare for the hearing, Ellie appeared in the kitchen, wearing her best dress and carrying her school backpack. "Daddy, Mrs. Martinez is picking me up early today because you have to go to the important meeting." Noah knelt to her level, his heart aching at the trust in her 8-year-old eyes. "That's right, sweetheart. Daddy has to go talk to a judge about Uncle Samuel's special water. Are you going to tell them why it's important to protect it?" "I'm going to try." Ellie hugged him fiercely. "Uncle Samuel knew you'd take good care of his water. I know it too." At 8 o'clock, Tom Henderson arrived with his pickup truck loaded with equipment that made Noah's pulse quicken. "Figured you might need some visual aids for your presentation," Tom said, unloading a portable water testing kit, samples from various springs on the property, and a working model of the filtration system that Samuel had apparently built in his workshop. "Where did you find this?" "Your uncle showed it to me last spring. said someday someone might need to demonstrate how natural filtration works better than industrial processing. Tom's weathered face was grim. Heard Clearwater's been making threats. Want you to know the whole town's behind you on this. Jenny Martinez arrived with Mrs. Patterson from the post office and Bill Watson from the feed store. We're coming to the hearing, Jenny announced. People need to hear from the community that would be affected by Clearwater's extraction plan. By 9 o'clock, a convoy of vehicles was heading toward the county courthouse, Noah and Sarah in his pickup, Maria Santos in her sedan, and a line of cars carrying what appeared to be half the population of Cedar Falls. Word had spread through the small community that this hearing would determine their water future, and people were determined to have their voices heard. The courthouse was a red brick building that had served Barton County for nearly a century. Its courtroom was designed for routine legal proceedings, not the crowd that packed its benches as interested citizens claimed every available seat. Judge Harrison was a man in his 60s with silver hair and the kind of measured demeanor that suggested he'd heard every argument lawyers could devise. He called the hearing to order promptly at 10 o'clock, his eyes taking in the unusual crowd with obvious interest. This is an emergency petition for injunctive relief filed by Clearwater Development Group, he began. The petitioners claim that delays in accessing groundwater resources are causing immediate economic harm to agricultural operations in the region. Clearwater's lead attorney, a sharp-dressed woman named Catherine Bell, rose to present their case. She was everything Maria had warned Noah to expect: polished, confident, and armed with charts and studies that painted a picture of agricultural crisis requiring immediate intervention. Your Honor, drought conditions throughout the region have created emergency situations on multiple farms, Bell began. Our clients have invested significant resources in developing sustainable water extraction systems that can alleviate these conditions and prevent economic disaster for local agricultural communities. She presented a series of graphs showing declining rainfall, stressed crops, and economic projections that suggested massive agricultural losses if water access was delayed. The presentation was professional and persuasive, supported by testimony from farmers who claimed their operations were threatened by water shortages. The respondent, Mr. Carter, has no expertise in water management or agricultural development, Bell continued. His opposition to necessary water extraction appears to be based on misguided environmental concerns that ignore the immediate needs of working families whose livelihoods depend on agricultural production. Judge Harrison listened carefully, asking occasional questions about technical details and legal precedents. When Bell concluded her presentation, he turned to Maria Santos. Miss Santos, I understand you represent Mr. Carter's interests in this matter. What evidence do you present to dispute the petitioner's claims of emergency necessity? Maria rose, with the calm confidence of someone who'd been preparing for this moment since Samuel first contacted her office. Your Honor, we dispute not the existence of water needs in the region, but the claim that industrial extraction is the appropriate solution. She began by presenting Samuel's geological research, using the working model Tom Henderson had provided to demonstrate how the aquifer system actually functioned. The courtroom was quiet as she explained the difference between sustainable water management and industrial extraction. The petitioners want to remove water faster than it can be naturally replenished, Maria explained. Their own environmental impact studies, which they've attempted to keep confidential, show that their extraction methods will deplete the aquifer within 7 years. Bell objected, claiming the impact studies were proprietary information, but Judge Harrison overruled her. This is a hearing about environmental protection, Counselor. Environmental impact evidence is certainly relevant. Maria then called Sarah to testify about the aquifer's regional significance. Sarah's presentation was masterful, combining scientific expertise with clear explanations that made complex geology understandable to everyone in the courtroom. This isn't just about one farm or one community, Sarah explained. The aquifer system extends across 3 counties and provides base flow for dozens of streams and rivers. Industrial extraction at the scale Clearwater proposes would affect water supplies for hundreds of thousands of people. But the truly dramatic moment came when Maria called Noah to testify about Samuel's master blueprint. Noah walked to the witness stand carrying the rolled plans that represented his uncle's life work, his hands steady despite the weight of what he was about to reveal. "Mr. Carter," Maria began, "would you please tell the court about your uncle's background and expertise in water management?" Noah unrolled Samuel's blueprint on the courtroom table, its intricate details visible to everyone present. "My uncle Samuel Carter was a professional geologist with the U.S. Geological Survey for 30 years. He specialized in groundwater protection and sustainable water management systems." The courtroom erupted in surprised murmurs. Bell rose to object, but Judge Harrison waved her down. "I'd like to hear this testimony, Counselor." Noah explained Samuel's decades-long study of the regional aquifer system, his documentation of corporate extraction damage throughout the Southeast, and his development of sustainable management alternatives that could meet water needs without environmental destruction. "Your Honor," Noah concluded, "my uncle spent his final years developing a water management system that would serve this region's needs for generations. What Clearwater proposes would meet short-term demand by destroying long-term supply." Bell's cross-examination was aggressive, focusing on Noah's lack of formal training in geology or water management. But her attack seemed to backfire as community members in the courtroom became visibly angry at her dismissive attitude toward local concerns. The hearing's climax came when Maria presented Samuel's final piece of evidence, a letter from Dr. Marcus Webb of the Kentucky Geological Survey, confirming Samuel's professional credentials and endorsing his sustainable management plan. Mr. Carter's uncle was one of the most respected groundwater specialists in the country. Dr. Webb's letter stated, "His analysis of the regional aquifer system is scientifically sound, and his management recommendations represent the gold standard for sustainable water resource protection." Judge Harrison called a recess to review the evidence. During the break, Noah found himself surrounded by community members who wanted to express their support. Tom Henderson shook his hand firmly. "Your uncle would be proud," he said simply. But Noah's attention was focused on Belle, who was speaking urgently into her cell phone near the courthouse steps. Her expression suggested the hearing wasn't going as Clearwater had expected. When court reconvened, Judge Harrison's expression was thoughtful but determined. "This court has reviewed the evidence presented by both parties. The petition for emergency injunctive relief raises important questions about balancing immediate economic needs with long-term environmental protection." Noah held his breath, aware that the next words would determine not just the fate of the aquifer, but his ability to protect his daughter and honor his uncle's legacy. The courtroom was absolutely silent as Judge Harrison prepared to render his decision on whether corporate extraction or community stewardship would control the water that flowed beneath their feet. Judge Harrison adjusted his glasses and looked directly at Noah before speaking. "Mr. Carter, I've been on this bench for 22 years, and I've rarely seen a case where the stakes were so clearly defined. The question before this court is not simply whether Clearwater Development Group should be granted emergency extraction rights. The question is whether this community's water future should be determined by short-term corporate interests or long-term sustainable stewardship." Noah felt Sarah's hand squeeze his arm as the judge continued. "The evidence presented today reveals that Mr. Samuel Carter was not merely an amateur geologist, but a distinguished professional whose expertise in groundwater management was recognized at the federal level. His sustainable water management plan represents a scientifically sound alternative to industrial extraction." Belle rose from her seat. "Your Honor, with respect, Mr. Samuel Carter is deceased, and his nephew lacks the qualifications to implement such a complex system." "Ms. Belle," Judge Harrison interrupted, his voice carrying quiet authority, "you will have an opportunity to respond. Please be seated." The judge turned his attention to a document that Noah recognized as the original water rights deed from 1887. More significantly, this court has reviewed historical documentation establishing that the Carter property holds perpetual water rights that predate modern extraction laws. These rights carry with them both privileges and responsibilities. Noah's heart pounded as he realized what the judge was building toward. The 1887 deed explicitly requires the landowner to act as steward of the water resource for the benefit of present and future generations. This is not merely a property right. It is a conservation trust that has legal standing in environmental protection law. Catherine Bell's face had gone pale. The historical deed was apparently news to Clearwater's legal team, despite their months of preparation. Judge Harrison continued. Furthermore, the court notes that Clearwater Development Group has failed to disclose the full scope of their extraction plans. Internal documents submitted as evidence show that their operations would deplete the aquifer within 7 years, leaving communities throughout the region without sustainable water sources. He paused, looking out at the packed courtroom where farmers, shopkeepers, and families sat, waiting to learn their water future. However, this court also recognizes that legitimate agricultural water needs exist throughout the region. Drought conditions are real, and farmers require reliable water access to maintain their operations. Noah felt his stomach drop. The judge was preparing to split the difference, potentially granting Clearwater limited extraction rights while requiring environmental protections. Therefore, Judge Harrison said, this court denies Clearwater Development Group's petition for emergency extraction rights as currently proposed. The courtroom erupted in cheers and applause. Tom Henderson let out a whoop of joy, and Jenny Martinez hugged Mrs. Patterson with tears in her eyes. But Judge Harrison wasn't finished. However, he continued, raising his voice over the celebration, this court also establishes the following conditions. The room fell silent again. Mr. Carter, your water rights come with corresponding responsibilities. This court is ordering the immediate implementation of your uncle's sustainable water management system, with construction to begin within 30 days and completion within 6 months. Noah's mind raced. Implementing Samuel's full system would require resources far beyond what the community had donated for the basic filtration project. Furthermore, the judge continued, you will work with agricultural representatives to ensure that legitimate water needs are met through sustainable extraction methods that do not exceed the aquifer's natural replenishment rate. Catherine Bell rose again. Your Honor, my clients have invested significant resources in developing extraction infrastructure. This ruling effectively destroys their investment without compensation. Ms. Bell, your clients invested in extraction rights they did not legally possess, Judge Harrison replied sharply. The Carter water rights predate your client's land purchases and take legal precedence. If Clearwater wishes to participate in sustainable water management under Mr. Carter's stewardship, they are free to negotiate appropriate agreements. The implications hit Noah like a physical blow. The judge wasn't just protecting the aquifer, was making Noah responsible for managing water resources for the entire region. It was exactly what Samuel had envisioned, but the scope of responsibility was overwhelming. Your Honor, Maria Santos rose. My client appreciates the court's confidence, but implementing a regional water management system requires significant technical and financial resources, which is why this court is also ordering the establishment of a regional water stewardship authority, with Mr. Carter as the designated steward and the authority to levy reasonable fees on water users to fund system maintenance and environmental protection. Noah felt the world shift around him. The judge was creating a legal framework that would give him control over the regional water system while providing the resources necessary to manage it responsibly. But Bell wasn't finished fighting. Your Honor, this ruling grants unprecedented authority to an individual with no training in water management or regional planning. The economic implications. Ms. Bell, your client's own environmental impact studies demonstrate the economic implications of uncontrolled extraction. Communities throughout the region would face water shortages within a decade under Clearwater's plan. This court finds that Mr. Carter's stewardship, guided by his uncle's professional expertise and supported by qualified technical advisors, serves the greater public interest. Judge Harrison leaned forward, his expression serious. Mr. Carter, this court is placing enormous responsibility on your shoulders. You will be accountable not just to this community, but to everyone whose water security depends on the aquifer system your property controls. Do you understand the magnitude of what this court is requiring? Noah stood slowly, feeling the weight of hundreds of eyes watching him. He thought about Samuel's decades of careful research, about the community members who had donated materials and labor, about his daughter's future and the future of every family whose water flowed through the aquifer beneath his feet. Yes, Your Honor, I understand. And do you accept this responsibility? Noah looked back at Sarah, whose expression showed both pride and concern. He thought about the letter Samuel had left him, about the trust his uncle had placed in the Carter's stubbornness to see this fight through to its conclusion. I accept, Your Honor. Judge Harrison nodded. Then this court's ruling is as follows. Clearwater Development Group's petition for emergency extraction rights is denied. Mr. Noah Carter is appointed as Regional Water Steward under the authority of the 1887 Water Rights Deed, with responsibility for implementing sustainable water management throughout the aquifer system. The Regional Water Stewardship Authority is hereby established with the power to regulate water extraction, fund environmental protection, and ensure equitable access to water resources. He banged his gavel. Court is adjourned. As the courtroom exploded in celebration and confusion, Noah remained standing at the defense table, trying to process what had just happened. He'd won a complete victory over Clearwater's extraction plans, but he'd also accepted responsibility for managing water resources for hundreds of thousands of people. Belle approached the table, her expression professional but strained. Mr. Carter, my clients will be appealing this decision. You should know that they don't give up easily. Neither do I, Noah replied. After she left, Maria Santos gathered her papers with the satisfied expression of a lawyer who'd just achieved something unprecedented. Noah, what Judge Harrison did today, creating a regional authority based on historical water rights, it's going to become a model for groundwater protection nationwide. If I can actually pull it off. You can. Samuel spent 30 years preparing for this moment, and you have an entire community ready to help. Maria's smile was confident. Besides, you just proved that one determined person with the right knowledge can defeat corporate power when the law is on their side. As Noah walked out of the courthouse into the Friday afternoon sunshine, he was surrounded by community members who wanted to shake his hand and express their gratitude. But his mind was already racing ahead to the practical challenges of implementing Samuel's water management system on a regional scale. He had 6 months to build infrastructure that would serve multiple communities, establish sustainable extraction protocols, and create a funding mechanism that would make the whole system financially viable. Most importantly, he had a custody hearing on Monday where he'd have to convince a different judge that his new responsibilities as regional water steward made him a suitable parent for 8-year-old Ellie. The battle for the water was won, but the war for his family was just beginning. Monday morning arrived with the kind of crisp October air that made everything seem possible, but Noah's confidence from Friday's victory had been replaced by a different kind of nervousness. The custody hearing would be held in the same courthouse where he'd defeated Clearwater, but family court operated by different rules and different priorities. Judge Patricia Morse was known for her no-nonsense approach to custody cases and her unwavering focus on children's best interests. Noah sat at the defendant's table with Maria Santos, watching as the Whitmans entered with their attorney Harrison and an arsenal of photographs, financial documents, and expert testimony designed to prove that 8-year-old Ellie would be better off in their custody. Remember, Maria whispered, everything changed on Friday. You're not just a struggling single father anymore. You're the regional water steward with legal authority over a multi-million-dollar natural resource. But Noah knew that impressive titles meant nothing if he couldn't demonstrate that his new responsibilities would benefit rather than burden his daughter. Margaret Whitman took the witness stand first, her testimony delivered with the polished confidence of someone accustomed to getting her way. She described Ellie's living conditions at the farmhouse with clinical precision: the leaking roof, the unreliable heating system, the isolation from proper educational and cultural opportunities. "Your Honor," Margaret said, her voice carrying genuine emotion, "we love our granddaughter dearly. We simply want what's best for her." Living in that deteriorating farmhouse, hours from decent schools and medical care, cannot serve Ellie's long-term interests. Attorney Harrison followed with a methodical presentation of Noah's financial struggles, his employment instability, and the farmhouse's numerous safety hazards. The photographs were devastating images of rotted porch boards, exposed electrical wiring, and rooms that looked more like construction sites than living spaces. The respondent has taken on enormous responsibilities as regional water steward, Harrison argued. These duties will require extensive travel, complex negotiations with government agencies, and management of a multi-million-dollar infrastructure project. How can he possibly provide the stable, focused parenting that Ellie needs? It was a sophisticated argument that turned Noah's legal victory into evidence of his unsuitability as a parent. The more successful he became at protecting the aquifer, the less time and energy he'd have for raising his daughter. When Maria called Noah to testify, he walked to the witness stand carrying a folder that contained not legal documents, but something more personal: photographs of Ellie exploring Samuel's workshop, helping with the water filtration project, and playing in the yard where she'd discovered dozens of geological specimens. "Mr. Carter," Maria began, "please tell the court about your daughter's adjustment to life at the farmhouse." Noah looked out at the courtroom, where he was surprised to see several familiar faces from Friday's hearing. Tom Henderson sat in the back row, along with Jenny Martinez and other community members, who'd apparently come to support him. "Ellie loves it there," Noah said simply. "She's found a sense of belonging that she never had in our apartment in Louisville. She knows every rock in Uncle Samuel's collection. She's learned the names of birds and wildflowers, and she talks about the water project like it's the most important thing in the world. But isn't it true that your new responsibilities will require significant time away from home? The Regional Water Stewardship Authority will require careful management, but most of the work can be done from the farmhouse. Samuel designed it as a working research station, and I'm continuing that tradition." Noah opened his folder and showed photographs of the workshop where he and Ellie spent their evenings. "My daughter isn't being separated from my work, she's becoming part of it." Harrison's cross-examination was predictably aggressive, focusing on Noah's lack of formal education in water management and the financial uncertainty that came with managing a newly created authority. "Mr. Carter, you've never managed a budget larger than a construction project, yet you're now responsible for millions of dollars in public resources. Don't you think that's a rather steep learning curve for someone trying to raise a young child?" "I think it's exactly the kind of challenge that teaches children about responsibility and service to community," Noah replied. "Ellie is learning that sometimes we inherit things that are bigger than ourselves, and we have a duty to protect them for future generations." But the hearing's turning point came when Maria called an unexpected witness, Ellie herself. Judge Morse looked concerned. "Ms. Santos, the child is only 8 years old. Are you certain this is appropriate?" "Your Honor, Ellie has specifically requested to speak about where she wants to live. Given her maturity and the unique circumstances of this case, I believe her voice should be heard." Ellie walked to the witness stand wearing the same dress she'd worn to Friday's hearing, her small hands folded carefully in her lap. Judge Morse leaned forward with the gentle expression she reserved for child witnesses. "Ellie, do you understand why we're here today?" "Yes, ma'am. You're deciding if I should live with Daddy or with Grammy and Grandpa. And do you have feelings about that?" Ellie's voice was clear and certain. "I want to live with Daddy at Uncle Samuel's house. It's our home now." Margaret Whitman's attorney tried to intervene, suggesting that an 8-year-old couldn't understand the complexity of the decision, but Judge Morse waved him quiet. "Ellie, can you tell me why you want to stay at the farmhouse?" "Because Daddy needs me to help take care of Uncle Samuel's special water, and because it's where I belong." Ellie looked directly at her grandparents, her expression sympathetic but firm. "Grammy and Grandpa have a beautiful house, but it's not my house. The farmhouse is where Daddy and I are building something important together." "What kind of important thing?" "We're protecting water so that lots of people can have clean drinking water forever and ever. Uncle Samuel started the work, but now it's Daddy's job, and someday it might be my job too." Judge Morse was quiet for a moment, studying the earnest 8-year-old who spoke about water stewardship with the seriousness most children reserved for favorite toys. "Ellie, are you happy living at the farmhouse?" "Very happy. Daddy and I have adventures every day, and Miss Sarah teaches me about rocks and water and how to take care of the land. I'm learning things I could never learn anywhere else." After Ellie's testimony, the courtroom atmosphere had shifted noticeably. Even Harrison seemed to realize that his arguments about stability and educational opportunities had been undermined by a child who articulated her own needs with remarkable clarity. Judge Morse called a brief recess, during which Noah found himself surrounded by community supporters. Tom Henderson shook his hand. "That little girl of yours has more sense than most adults I know." When court reconvened, Judge Morse's expression was thoughtful but decisive. "This court has considered all testimony and evidence presented regarding the custody of Ellie Carter. The petitioners have raised legitimate concerns about the physical condition of the respondent's home and the demands of his new professional responsibilities." Noah felt his stomach tighten, but the judge continued. "However, this court finds that the respondent has demonstrated not just the ability to provide for his daughter's physical needs, but something more valuable, the opportunity for her to grow up as part of something meaningful and important." Margaret Whitman's face went pale. The child's own testimony reveals a level of maturity and understanding that suggests she is thriving in her current environment. She is not being neglected or endangered. She is being raised to understand responsibility, community service, and environmental stewardship. Judge Morse looked directly at Noah. "Mr. Carter, this court is granting you continued custody of your daughter with the following conditions. You will complete necessary safety repairs to the farmhouse within 60 days. You will ensure that Ellie's educational needs are met through enrollment in the Cedar Falls Elementary School, and you will provide regular reports to this court regarding her welfare and adjustment." The courtroom erupted in quiet celebration. Sarah reached over and squeezed Noah's hand, her eyes bright with tears of relief. "Furthermore," Judge Morse continued, "this court notes that Mr. Carter's appointment as regional water steward represents exactly the kind of stable, meaningful employment that serves children's long-term interests. Ellie will grow up understanding that her father's work serves the greater good, which is a lesson more valuable than private school or swimming pools." Harrison rose to object, but Judge Morse cut him off. "Counselor, your clients are welcome to maintain their relationship with their granddaughter through regular visitation, but custody will remain with her father." As the hearing concluded, Noah felt a weight lift from his shoulders that he'd been carrying since the day the inheritance letter first arrived. He'd not only kept his daughter, but proven that the life they were building together at the farmhouse was exactly what she needed. Margaret and Robert Whitman approached him as the courtroom emptied, their expressions a mixture of disappointment and resignation. "Noah," Margaret said quietly, "we still think Ellie deserves better than that old farmhouse." "She deserves to grow up knowing that her father fights for what matters," Noah replied. "I think she's getting exactly what she deserves." As they walked out of the courthouse into the October afternoon, Ellie slipped her hand into Noah's and looked up at him with a smile that made everything worth fighting for. "Daddy, can we go home now? I want to check on Uncle Samuel's springs and make sure they're still flowing right." Noah looked down at his daughter, this remarkable little girl who understood water stewardship better than most adults, and realized that they'd won something more valuable than any legal victory. They'd won the right to build a future together. 1 year later, Noah stood beside the completed community well that marked the heart of Samuel's sustainable water management system. The October morning was crisp and clear, perfect for the dedication ceremony that would officially launch the Regional Water Stewardship Authority as a model for environmental protection throughout the southeast. The farmhouse behind him bore little resemblance to the sagging structure he'd inherited. The roof was solid, the foundation reinforced, and the wraparound porch restored to its original strength and beauty. But the most important changes were in the network of monitoring wells, filtration systems, and distribution pipes that turned Samuel's vision into reality. "Daddy, they're ready for your speech," Ellie called from the crowd that had gathered for the ceremony. At 9 years old, she moved through the assembled visitors with the confidence of someone who understood her role as the next generation of water stewards. Her school project on aquifer management had won the state science fair, and she spoke about sustainable development with the authority of someone who'd watched it happen in her own backyard. Sarah approached with a clipboard full of technical reports that documented the system's first year of operation. As Noah's deputy and the authority's chief hydrologist, she'd managed the complex coordination between government agencies, environmental groups, and local communities that made regional water management possible. "The numbers are better than Samuel projected," she told Noah, her professional satisfaction evident. "Water quality has improved by 30% since we eliminated industrial extraction, and the aquifer's recharge rate has stabilized at sustainable levels." Noah reviewed the reports, still amazed by what they'd accomplished in 12 months. The authority now managed water resources for 6 counties, providing clean water to over 200 people, while generating enough revenue to fund ongoing environmental protection and community development projects. "Any word from Clearwater?" Noah asked. Sarah's smile was sharp with satisfaction. "They've moved their operations to Texas, where they're facing the same kind of legal challenges we mounted here. Turns out communities throughout the region are using our model to fight corporate water extraction." The dedication ceremony began with remarks from Governor Patricia Mills, who praised the Regional Water Stewardship Authority as a breakthrough in community-controlled environmental protection. Federal officials spoke about using the Kentucky model to guide national groundwater policy, and environmental lawyers from 6 states attended to study the legal framework Maria Santos had established. But Noah's attention was focused on the community members who'd made the project possible. Tom Henderson had expanded his hardware store to supply materials for water system maintenance throughout the region. Jenny Martinez had developed environmental education programs that brought students from across Kentucky to study sustainable water management. Even Bill Watson from the feed store had found new purpose as the authority's community liaison, helping other rural areas understand the benefits of local resource control. When Noah rose to speak, he looked out at faces that had become familiar over the past year: scientists and farmers, government officials and school children, environmental activists and business leaders who'd learned that protecting natural resources could also support economic development. "A year ago, my daughter and I arrived at a farmhouse that everyone said was worthless," Noah began. "We were broke, desperate, and facing a custody battle that could have separated our family forever. What we found instead was a community that understood the difference between price and value." He paused, looking at Ellie, who stood beside Sarah with the kind of pride that comes from watching your father do something important. Samuel Carter spent 30 years studying the water that flows beneath our feet. He understood that natural resources don't belong to whoever can extract them fastest or sell them for the highest price. They belong to the communities that depend on them, and to the generations who'll inherit what we leave behind. Noah gestured toward the well system that now served as the centerpiece of a regional network. "This isn't just about water. It's about proving that communities can take control of their own futures, that environmental protection and economic development can work together, and that sometimes the most important battles are fought not in corporate boardrooms, but in the places where people actually live." The ceremony concluded with the traditional ribbon cutting, but Noah noticed that Ellie had brought her own pair of scissors. When he asked her why, she grinned with the mischief that reminded him of her mother at her best. "Because you said this belongs to my generation too, Daddy. I want to help start it." That afternoon, after the officials had departed and the crowds had dispersed, Noah and Ellie walked the property boundaries that Samuel had mapped so carefully decades earlier. The springs still flowed as they had for millennia, but now their water served communities throughout the region while remaining protected for future generations. "Do you think Uncle Samuel would be happy with what we did?" Ellie asked, collecting samples from the main spring for the monitoring program she'd designed as part of her advanced science studies. "I think he'd be amazed," Noah replied. "He hoped someone would protect the water. He never imagined they'd turn it into a model for the whole country." They paused at Samuel's grave, which Sarah had marked with a simple stone that read, "Samuel Carter, 1950 to 2024. He understood that water belongs to tomorrow." Ellie placed a bouquet of wildflowers beside the marker, a weekly ritual that had become her way of staying connected to the uncle she'd never met, but whose legacy shaped her daily life. "Daddy, when I grow up, will I be the regional water steward?" Noah considered the question seriously. Ellie's understanding of hydrology and environmental science already exceeded that of most adults, and her natural leadership skills suggested she'd inherited more than just the Carter stubbornness. "That depends on what you want to do with your life, sweetheart. The authority will need good leadership for generations to come, but it will also need scientists, engineers, educators, and community organizers. You could serve in any of those roles." "I want to do what you do," she said with the certainty that made her opinions impossible to dismiss. "Help communities protect their water and build things that will last forever." As they walked back toward the farmhouse in the gathering dusk, Noah reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. The desperate single father who'd arrived with nothing but an inheritance letter and a determination to keep his daughter had become the architect of a regional environmental protection system that served as a national model. But more importantly, he'd given Ellie something money couldn't buy, the knowledge that her father had fought for something bigger than personal gain, and the understanding that her own future was connected to the welfare of her community and the protection of the natural world. Sarah was waiting on the porch with dinner and the kind of contented expression that came from work that mattered. She'd moved into the farmhouse 6 months earlier, not just as Noah's partner in the water authority, but as his partner in building the life Samuel had envisioned for this place. "How did the samples look?" she asked Ellie, who immediately launched into a detailed report on mineral content, pH levels, and seasonal variations that would have impressed a graduate student in environmental science. As they sat down to dinner, Noah looked around the kitchen where he'd first discovered the geological survey that had changed everything. The water-stained walls had been repaired, the ancient appliances replaced, but Samuel's rock collection still occupied the mantelpiece, and his field notebooks remained on the shelf where serious research belonged. Outside, the sound of spring water flowing toward the community wells provided a constant reminder of why they were there and what they were protecting. It was the sound of abundance preserved, of resources managed wisely, of a future where clean water would still flow long after everyone in this room had become part of the earth that filtered and protected it. Noah raised his glass of water clean, pure water that had traveled through limestone and time to reach this table, and smiled at the people who'd helped him understand that some inheritances are too valuable to squander. "To Samuel," he said, "who taught us that the best treasures are the ones we protect for tomorrow." As they touched glasses in the farmhouse kitchen, the springs outside continued their eternal work, carrying clean water toward communities that had learned to value stewardship over extraction, sustainability over short-term profit, and the kind of wealth that could never be depleted because it grew stronger with each generation that understood its true worth. The old farmhouse settled around them with its familiar evening sounds, but tonight those creaks and sighs spoke not of decay, but of a structure strong enough to support the dreams of everyone who called it home. Every parent knows the weight of watching their child's eyes when you can't provide what they need. When Jonas Calder lost his job and home, he felt like he'd failed his 8-year-old daughter Lena in every way that mattered. All he could offer her was a run-down house filled with junk that his uncle had left behind. The neighbors called it the junk house because of all the old machinery and broken radios scattered everywhere. While Jonas worried about bills and job interviews, Lena explored their strange new home and found wonder in the forgotten things. One day she came to him and whispered, "Dad, there's something in the junk house." What Jonas found behind a hidden wall would change everything. His uncle had left behind a secret laboratory with inventions worth $50 million. But when others learned about the discovery, Jonas realized he'd have to fight to protect both his daughter and the legacy his family had been hiding. What would you do if losing everything led you to find more than you ever imagined? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning sun cast long shadows through the grimy windows of what the locals had dubbed the junk house, illuminating dust motes that danced like memories in the stale air. Jonas Calder stood in the doorway of what had once been a living room, watching his daughter Lena navigate between towers of old electronics and rusted mechanical parts with the grace of a child who had learned to find beauty in broken things. 3 months ago, Jonas had been a project manager at Meridian Construction, pulling down $65,000 a year and living in a modest 2-bedroom apartment with Lena in the suburbs of Millbrook. He had health insurance, a savings account, and plans for Lena's college fund. Then the recession hit the construction industry like a sledgehammer, and companies started laying off workers in waves. Jonas had thought his 15 years of experience would protect him. But when Meridian downsized by 40%, seniority meant nothing. The unemployment benefits lasted 8 weeks. His savings account, which had seemed reasonable for emergencies, evaporated with shocking speed when faced with rent, utilities, groceries, and Lena's school expenses. He had applied for every construction job within a 50-mile radius, then expanded his search to include project management positions in other industries. Nothing. The economy had too many qualified people chasing too few positions. The eviction notice came on a Tuesday morning while Lena was at school. Jonas had stared at the legal document, feeling something cold settle in his chest. He had exactly 17 days to come up with 3 months back, rent, or find somewhere else to live. That evening, as he watched Lena do her homework at their small kitchen table, he realized he would have to tell her they were losing their home. But before he could find the words, the phone rang. It was Margaret Winters, the lawyer handling his great-uncle Chester's estate. Uncle Chester had died 6 months. Earlier, a man Jonas barely remembered from childhood family gatherings, known for his wild stories about inventions and government conspiracies. Most of the family had considered Chester eccentric at best, possibly mentally ill at worst. "Your uncle left you his property in Millbrook," Margaret had said, her voice carrying a note of apologetic resignation. "I have to be honest with you, Mr. Calder. It's not much. The house needs extensive work, and it's filled with, well, decades of collected items. But it's yours free and clear, no mortgage, and the property taxes are current." Jonas had driven out to see the house that same evening, leaving Lena with their neighbor, Mrs. Rodriguez. The property sat on 2 acres at the end of Maple Street, where the suburban development gave way to overgrown fields. The house itself was a 1940s craftsman that might have been charming once, but years of neglect had left the white paint peeling and the front porch sagging. What struck Jonas immediately was the sheer volume of stuff visible through every window, stacks of boxes, electronic equipment, and machinery that seemed to fill every available space. The key Margaret had given him stuck in the front door lock, but eventually turned with a grudging click. The smell hit him first, not unpleasant, but musty and complex, like old books mixed with motor oil, and something metallic he couldn't identify. The interior was a maze. Narrow pathways wound between towers of cardboard boxes, shelves lined with radio parts, and tables covered with mechanical devices in various states of assembly and disrepair. In what had once been the living room, a massive oak desk sat buried under layers of blueprints, technical manuals, and notebooks filled with Chester's precise handwriting. Jonas had picked up one of the notebooks at random and found pages of mathematical equations, circuit diagrams, and notes about something called harmonic energy conversion. The writing was methodical, almost obsessive, with dates going back decades. Standing there in the cluttered house, Jonas had felt a strange mix of desperation and possibility. It wasn't the home he would have chosen for Lena, but it was shelter, and it was free. More importantly, it was theirs, at least until he could figure out something better. Now, 3 weeks later, Jonas watched Lena crouch beside an old radio, her small fingers tracing the brass dials with the kind of reverence other children reserved for toys. She had adapted to their new circumstances with a resilience that both amazed and broke his heart. When he had explained that they were moving to Uncle Chester's house, she had simply nodded and asked if she could bring her books. "Dad, look at this," Lena called, holding up what appeared to be a hand-built crystal radio. Uncle Chester wrote his name right here on the bottom. Jonas joined her beside the radio, noting the careful inscription, C. Calder, 1978, Prototype, 3. Everything in the house seemed to be labeled this, way dates, version numbers, cryptic notations that suggested Chester had been far more methodical in his collecting than it first appeared. "He must have built this himself," Jonas said, examining the craftsmanship. The components were arranged with precision, and the soldering work was professional quality. "Your great-uncle was apparently quite an inventor." Lena's eyes lit up with the kind of curiosity that made Jonas remember why he loved being her father, even when everything else in his life felt like it was falling apart. She had her mother's eyes, Sarah's eyes bright green, and always asking questions. Sarah had died in a car accident when Lena was 3, leaving Jonas to navigate single parenthood while grieving the loss of the woman who had been his anchor. In many ways, that loss had prepared him for this current crisis. When you've already lost the most important thing in your life, other losses feel manageable by comparison. "Can we make it work?" Lena asked, cradling the radio carefully. "Maybe," Jonas said, though he had no idea how to repair a crystal radio. "We'll have to learn together." This had become their routine over the past 3 weeks. While Jonas spent his mornings applying for jobs online and his afternoons driving to interviews that seemed to go nowhere, Lena explored the house like an archaeologist, uncovering treasures and curiosities that spoke to Chester's decades of solitary work. She had found boxes of vacuum tubes arranged by size, drawers full of resistors and capacitors sorted by value, and shelves lined with technical manuals covering everything from electronics to mechanical engineering. The more Jonas learned about his uncle, the more mysterious the man became. Neighbors remembered Chester as a quiet loner who had worked at the local radio station for 30 years before retiring in the early 1990s. He had never married, rarely socialized, and spent most of his time tinkering in his house. But the sophistication of the equipment Jonas found suggested Chester's interests had gone far beyond hobbyist electronics. In the basement workshop, Jonas had discovered a complete electronics lab with test equipment that looked expensive and professional. Oscilloscopes, frequency generators, and measurement devices that Jonas recognized from his engineering courses in college sat on workbenches that Chester had obviously used regularly. The basement also contained something that puzzled Jonas, several areas where the concrete floor showed signs of recent patching, as if Chester had been digging up and repouring sections of the foundation. Mrs. Hartwell, the elderly woman who lived in the house closest to Chester's property, had been their most valuable source of information about their predecessor. She was in her 70s, with silver hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing happening in the neighborhood. 3 days after Jonas and Lena moved in, She had appeared at their front door with a casserole and a wealth of stories about Chester. "Your uncle was a brilliant man," she had told Jonas while Lena played with Mrs. Hartwell's ancient golden retriever in the backyard. But he was also frightened of something. In his later years, he would check his mailbox at odd hours, always looking over his shoulder like he expected someone to be watching him. Mrs. Hartwell had lowered her voice conspiratorially. There were men who came around asking questions about Chester, even after he died. Government types, or maybe corporate. They had that look, you know. Too clean, too serious. They wanted to know if Chester had left behind any papers or equipment. Jonas had pressed for more details, but Mrs. Hartwell claimed she had told the men nothing. Chester had been a good neighbor, she said, quiet and helpful when she needed her gutters cleaned or her driveway shoveled. She owed him her loyalty, even in death. Now, as Jonas watched Lena carefully set the crystal radio on Chester's old desk, he wondered what his uncle had been working on that could attract the attention of government agents. The house contained enough electronic equipment to stock a small laboratory, but Jonas had yet to find anything that seemed particularly significant or valuable. Most of the devices appeared to be experiments or prototypes, interesting from a technical standpoint but hardly worth government scrutiny. His laptop chimed with an email notification, pulling Jonas back to the immediate reality of their situation. Another job rejection, this one from a construction firm in the next county. The email was polite and generic, thanking him for his interest, while informing him they had selected a candidate whose qualifications more closely matched their needs. Jonas closed the laptop and rubbed his eyes. The unemployment benefits had stopped 2 weeks ago, and his savings account now contained exactly $47.32. He had been selling items from their old apartment furniture, electronics, anything with value to buy groceries and keep their cell phone service active. But those resources were nearly exhausted. "Dad?" Lena's voice was soft, concerned. "Are you okay?" Jonas looked at his daughter, who was watching him with the kind of adult awareness that no 8-year-old should have to develop. She understood more about their situation than he wished she did, but he had learned that trying to shield her completely from their circumstances only made her more anxious. "I'm fine, sweetheart," he said, managing a smile, "just thinking about what we should explore next in Uncle Chester's collection." Lena brightened immediately. "I found something interesting in the kitchen. There's a notebook wedged behind the refrigerator. I couldn't get it out, but I could see writing on the edges." Jonas followed her to the kitchen, where she pointed to a gap between the old refrigerator and the wall. Sure enough, Jonas could see the corner of what appeared to be a leather-bound notebook. He managed to work it free, revealing a journal with C. Calder, Workshop Manual, 7, embossed on the cover. The notebook fell open to a page, dated 15 years earlier. Chester's handwriting filled the margins around detailed technical drawings of what appeared to be some kind of energy conversion device. At the bottom of the page, in larger letters than the rest of the text, Chester had written, "They're getting closer. Must finish before they find me." Jonas felt a chill run down his spine as he read the words. Whatever Chester had been working on, whatever had made him fearful in his final years, it was documented in this notebook. And if Mrs. Hartwell was right about men still asking questions, then perhaps Chester's secrets were still worth pursuing or still worth hiding. As the afternoon light began to fade, Jonas sat at Chester's desk with Lena beside him, both of them studying the mysterious notebook. For the first time since losing his job, Jonas felt something other than despair about their future. Perhaps Uncle Chester had left them more than just a house full of junk. Perhaps he had left them a puzzle worth solving, and maybe, just maybe, a way out of their desperate circumstances. 3 days after finding Chester's workshop manual, Jonas woke to the sound of static electricity crackling through the house. The noise was faint but persistent, like the hum of an old television tuned to a dead channel. He checked his phone 3:47 a.m. Beside him in the double bed they now shared in Chester's old bedroom, Lena stirred, but didn't wake. Jonas slipped out of bed and followed the sound down the hallway, past towers of boxed equipment and shelves lined with mechanical curiosities. The static grew louder as he approached the basement door, which stood slightly ajar. He was certain he had closed it before going to bed. The basement was Chester's domainer workshop that Jonas had only briefly explored. Wooden workbenches lined the walls, covered with electronic testing equipment, soldering stations, and projects in various stages of completion. In the center of the room sat Chester's prized possession, a massive oak cabinet that housed what appeared to be a custom-built radio system with dozens of dials, switches, and meters. The static was coming from this radio. Jonas approached cautiously, noting that several of the meters were active, their needles dancing in response to some invisible signal. He had assumed the radio was non-functional, just another piece of Chester's collection, but clearly it was receiving power from somewhere. A small green light glowed steadily beside a switch marked "Receive." As Jonas reached for the volume control to silence the static, the noise suddenly coalesced into something recognizable, a human voice, speaking through layers of interference. Testing Sunday, March 15th, 1987. This is Chester Calder, recording message number 43 for Project Sanctuary. Jonas froze. His uncle's voice, 3 decades younger but unmistakably the same dry tone Jonas remembered from childhood family gatherings, continued speaking through the ancient radio. "I've confirmed they've been monitoring my communications, the phone calls, the mail, probably the house itself. Dr. Ramsey was right. The Department of Energy investigation was just the beginning. They know what we've accomplished, and they want it buried along with anyone who understands how it works." The voice paused, and Jonas could hear papers rustling in the background of the recording. "I'm implementing the Sanctuary Protocol tonight. The working prototype will be secured in the sub-basement chamber, along with all documentation and component specifications. If something happens to me, if I disappear or die under suspicious circumstances, then the backup transmitter will activate automatically after a preset delay. Anyone in my family who inherits this house will eventually hear this message." Jonas felt his heart racing. His uncle's paranoid stories suddenly didn't seem so paranoid. "The device I've created, what we call the resonance engine, represents a fundamental breakthrough in energy conversion. We're not talking about improved efficiency, we're talking about a technology that could make fossil fuels obsolete overnight. Clean, unlimited power drawn from quantum fluctuations in the vacuum itself. The implications are, the transmission dissolved into static again, but Jonas had heard enough. He fumbled for the notebook, where he had seen Chester write about them getting closer. The dates aligned. Chester had made this recording just 2 years after writing that paranoid note. "Dad?" Lena's voice from the basement stairs made Jonas jump. "What's that noise?" "Just Uncle Chester's radio," Jonas said, though his voice came out strained. "Go back to bed, sweetheart." But Lena was already descending the stairs in her pajamas, her bare feet silent on the wooden steps. She approached the radio with the fearless curiosity that Jonas both admired and worried about. "It's talking," she said, pressing her ear close to one of the speakers. "It's just an old recording, honey. Sometimes radios pick up." "No, Dad." Lena's voice was firm with the certainty that only children possess. "It's trying to tell us something important." As if responding to her words, the static cleared again, and Chester's voice returned with startling clarity. "The resonance engine requires 3 components to function: the harmonic frequency generator, the quantum field stabilizer, and what I call the consciousness interface. The last component is the most crucial and the most dangerous. The device doesn't just convert energy, it responds to human intention, to focused thought patterns. That's why they want it so badly, and why it can never fall into the wrong hands." Lena looked up at Jonas with wide eyes. Uncle Chester hid something special in the house. "Lena, this is just..." Jonas stopped himself. The fear in Chester's recorded voice was genuine, and the technical details were far too sophisticated for a simple hobbyist. Whatever his uncle had been working on, it was real. The voice continued. I've encoded the access sequence in items throughout the house. The radio will only activate for family members. The receivers are tuned to specific genetic markers in our bloodline. If you're hearing this, then you're a Calder, and you have a choice to make. You can pretend this message never happened, live your life, and let my work remain buried. Or you can follow the clues I've left behind and claim what I've discovered. A new sound emerged from the radio series of musical tones, like a simple melody played on electronic chimes. That's the activation sequence for the first lock, Chester's voice explained. Memorize it. You'll need to reproduce these tones exactly to access the sub-basement chamber. But be warned, once you begin this journey, there will be others who notice. The same people who made me disappear will come looking for you. The static returned, drowning out Chester's voice. Jonas reached for the volume control, but before he could adjust it, the radio fell silent. The green light beside the receive switch flickered once and went dark. "Play it again, Dad," Lena said, her small hand reaching for the power switch. Jonas gently stopped her. "I don't think it works that way, sweetheart." But Lena was already humming the melody. They had heard a simple sequence of 8 notes that she reproduced perfectly. Jonas realized his daughter had inherited more than just her mother's eyes. She had Sarah's gift for music, the ability to hear a tune once and remember it forever. "We have to find Uncle Chester's secret, don't we?" Lena asked, looking up at him with complete trust. Jonas knelt beside his daughter, studying her face in the dim light of the basement workshop. 3 days ago, he had been a desperate man facing eviction and unemployment. Now he was apparently the heir to some kind of scientific breakthrough that his uncle had died protecting. The rational part of his mind insisted this was all nonsense, paranoid delusions of an eccentric old man who had spent too many years alone with his inventions. But the recording had been real. The technical language was precise and detailed. And most convincing of all, Chester had somehow rigged the radio to respond only to family members, which suggested a level of sophistication that went far beyond hobbyist electronics. "What do you think, Lena?" Jonas asked. "Should we try to solve Uncle Chester's puzzle?" Lena nodded solemnly. "He left it for us, didn't he? Like a treasure hunt, but important." Jonas thought about their financial situation, about the rejection letters accumulating in his email inbox, about the $47 in their bank account. Whatever Chester had hidden, it couldn't make their circumstances any worse. And if there was even a small chance that his uncle had actually invented something valuable— "Okay," Jonas said, "we'll try to find Uncle Chester's secret, but this has to be our secret, just between us. We don't tell anyone what we heard tonight." Lena crossed her heart with her finger, a gesture Sarah had taught her years ago. "Promise, Dad." As they climbed the basement stairs together, Jonas found himself humming the 8-note melody Lena had memorized. Tomorrow, they would begin searching for Chester's clues in earnest. Tonight, for the first time in months, Jonas fell asleep with something other than despair filling his thoughts. He dreamed of his uncle's voice, speaking about impossible technologies and unlimited energy, about secrets hidden in plain sight and enemies who would kill to possess them. In his dream, Chester wasn't paranoid at all. He was simply a man who had discovered something wonderful and terrible, and who had chosen to trust his family with the burden of deciding what to do with it. When Jonas woke the next morning, he could still hear the 8-note melody playing in his head, and he knew their lives had changed forever. The blueprint fragment fell from between the pages of a 1970s electronics manual like a whisper from the past. Jonas had been systematically searching Chester's collection, looking for anything that might relate to the 8-note sequence or the mysterious resonance engine, when the torn piece of technical drawing fluttered to the floor. Lena, who had become his eager assistant in their treasure hunt, picked up the fragment and studied it with the focused attention she usually reserved for her favorite books. "Dad, look at these symbols. They're the same ones from Uncle Chester's notebook." Jonas examined the blueprint fragment. It showed part of what appeared to be a cylindrical device with intricate internal components. Mathematical equations filled the margins, along with notes written in Chester's precise handwriting. At the bottom of the fragment, Someone had drawn the musical staff notation for the 8-note melody they had heard from the radio. The resonant frequency generator, Jonas read from the fragment's title. This must be one of the 3 components Chester mentioned. They were sitting in what had once been Chester's living room, surrounded by the organized chaos of their search. Over the past week, they had developed a system for exploring the house methodically. Jonas would examine the technical aspects of Chester's collection, while Lena used her intuitive understanding to spot patterns and connections that escaped her father's more analytical approach. The search had become necessary for practical reasons, as well as curiosity. Jonas's job prospects remained non-existent, and their savings were nearly depleted. He had started researching the value of Chester's electronics collection, hoping to sell some items without destroying anything that might be important to solving their mystery. Some of the testing equipment in the basement was worth thousands of dollars, enough to keep them housed and fed for several months. But every piece of equipment they examined seemed to be part of Chester's larger project. Nothing appeared random or purely decorative. Even the boxes of vacuum tubes were sorted according to some system that Jonas was beginning to understand related to harmonic frequencies and resonance patterns. "Mr. Calder?" The voice from the front porch made both Jonas and Lena freeze. They had been so absorbed in studying the blueprint fragment that neither had heard the car pull into their driveway. Jonas peered through the dusty front window and saw a man in his 50s standing on their porch. He wore an expensive-looking grey suit and carried a leather briefcase. His appearance was exactly what Mrs. Hartwell had described: too clean, too serious, with the unmistakable bearing of someone accustomed to authority. "Don't answer it," Lena whispered, though Jonas had already come to the same conclusion. They waited in silence as the man knocked again, more insistently this time. After several minutes, they heard his footsteps move around the side of the house. Jonas realized he was trying to peer through windows, looking for signs of occupancy. "Mr. Calder, I know you're in there," the man called out. "My name is Marcus Webb. I represent certain interests that had business dealings with your Uncle Chester. I'd like to discuss a proposition that could be very beneficial for you and your daughter." The mention of Lena made Jonas's protective instincts flare. He moved to the window and saw Webb standing in their backyard, studying the house with the methodical attention of someone conducting surveillance. "I'm prepared to make you a very generous offer for this property," Webb continued, his voice carrying clearly through the thin walls. "Cash purchase, well above market value, with no questions asked about the contents. You could be living somewhere much more suitable for a young family by the end of the week." Jonas felt Lena's small hand slip into his. She was frightened, but trying not to show it. The idea of leaving the junk house was appealing. They could start fresh, somewhere safe, somewhere normal. But Chester's warning about people who would kill for his invention echoed in Jonas's mind. Webb walked slowly around the house, and Jonas tracked his movement by following the sound of his footsteps. The man was being thorough, examining the exterior structure, probably looking for signs of recent excavation or modification. When he reached the front of the house again, Webb pulled out his phone and made a brief call. "The subjects are definitely in residence," Jonas heard him say. "The house shows signs of recent habitation, and there's a vehicle registered to Jonas Calder in the driveway. Recommend we move to Phase 2 if he doesn't respond to the initial approach." Phase 2. Jonas didn't like the sound of that. After Webb's car disappeared down Maple Street, Jonas and Lena remained hidden for another hour before resuming their search. The encounter had shaken them both, but it had also confirmed that Chester's paranoia was justified. Someone was indeed watching, and they wanted whatever Chester had hidden badly enough to make unsolicited offers on the property. "We need to find Uncle Chester's secret before they come back," Lena said with the kind of matter-of-fact determination that reminded Jonas of her mother. They returned to examining the blueprint fragment, this time with increased urgency. The technical drawings showed sophisticated engineering that was clearly beyond anything a hobbyist could create. The device appeared to be designed to generate and focus specific electromagnetic frequencies, with components that Jonas recognized from his college engineering courses mixed with others that seemed completely unfamiliar. In the margin of the blueprint, Chester had written a series of numbers: 7.83 Hz, 14.7 Hz, 22.1 Hz. Below the numbers, he had added a note: Schumann resonance, harmonic series, key to consciousness interface. Jonas was familiar with Schumann resonances from his engineering study, extremely low-frequency electromagnetic waves that occurred naturally in the Earth's atmosphere. But he had never heard of anyone trying to artificially generate or manipulate them, and he certainly didn't understand what Chester meant by a consciousness interface. "Dad, I found something," Lena called from across the room. She was standing beside Chester's old television set, holding what appeared to be a small electronic device about the size of a garage door opener. "It was taped to the back of the TV," she explained, handing him the device. "And look, it has the same symbols as the blueprint." The device was clearly one of Chester's creations, built with the same meticulous attention to detail as everything else in the house. It had a small speaker, a digital display, and a series of buttons marked with musical note symbols. When Jonas pressed the power button, the display lit up with the words, "Frequency generator, prototype 3. Lena immediately began pressing the buttons in the sequence of the 8-note melody they had memorized. As each note played through the device's speaker, the corresponding frequency appeared on the digital display. When she completed the sequence, the device emitted a soft chime and displayed a new message: "Authentication accepted, chamber access enabled." "We did it," Lena whispered, her eyes bright with excitement. Jonas felt a mixture of pride and apprehension. They had solved the first part of Chester's puzzle, but he had no idea what chamber access meant, or what they would find when they discovered Chester's hidden laboratory. Webb's visit had made it clear that they were not the only ones interested in Chester's secrets, and Jonas suspected their mysterious visitors would not remain patient much longer. That evening, as Lena slept beside him in Chester's old bedroom, Jonas lay awake studying the blueprint fragment and the frequency generator. Tomorrow, they would begin searching for the entrance to Chester's sub-basement chamber. Tonight, he tried to prepare himself for whatever they might discover about his uncle's revolutionary invention and the dangerous people who wanted to possess it. The Medal of Honor was hidden inside a hollowed-out copy of Advanced Electromagnetic Theory, wedged between hundreds of other technical books on Chester's workshop shelves. Lena discovered it while Jonas was examining the basement floor for signs of the sub-basement chamber entrance Chester had mentioned in his recorded message. "Dad, Uncle Chester was a soldier," Lena said, her voice filled with awe as she held up the bronze star-shaped medal. "There's a paper with it too." Jonas abandoned his search and joined his daughter at the bookshelf. The citation that accompanied the medal was dated 1972 and bore the seal of the United States Army. It commended Sergeant Chester Calder for distinguished service in classified research operations and exceptional valor in the defense of vital national security assets. What struck Jonas most was not the medal itself, but the fact that his family had never known about Chester's military service. The man they remembered as an eccentric loner who told wild stories about government conspiracies had apparently been decorated for classified military research. "There's more," Lena said, pulling a manila envelope from the same hiding place. Inside were photographs, military documents, and what appeared to be pages from a classified research journal. The photographs showed a much younger Chester in military uniform, working alongside other scientists in what looked like a sophisticated laboratory. One image caught Jonas's attention: Chester and two other men standing beside a device that bore a striking resemblance to the cylindrical generator shown in the blueprint fragment they had found. The journal pages were heavily redacted, with most of the technical details blacked out by military censors. But enough remained visible to paint a picture of cutting-edge energy research conducted under extreme secrecy. One entry, dated March 1973, mentioned successful demonstration of quantum vacuum energy extraction and potential applications for unlimited clean power generation. Your uncle was part of something called Project Blackbird. Jonas read from one of the documents. A classified research program investigating alternative energy sources for national defense applications. The final document in the envelope was a letter from the Department of Defense, dated 6 months after Chester's military commendation. It informed him that Project Blackbird was being terminated. All research materials were to be surrendered to military authorities, and participants were bound by lifetime secrecy agreements. The letter was signed by someone named Colonel Richard Hawthorne. Jonas felt pieces of the puzzle clicking into place. Chester hadn't been a paranoid amateur inventor. He had been a trained military researcher who had apparently continued his classified work in secret after the official program ended. The technology he had hidden in the house wasn't just valuable, it was based on research that the government had once considered vital to national security. "We need to be very careful," Jonas told Lena as they studied the documents together. If Uncle Chester was working on secret military projects, then the people looking for his invention might be more dangerous than we thought. As if summoned by his words, the sound of a car engine came from their driveway. Jonas peered through the basement window and saw Marcus Webb getting out of a black sedan, accompanied by 2 other men in suits. This time, Webb wasn't alone, and he didn't look like he planned to take no for an answer. "Basement," Jonas whispered, gathering up Chester's documents. "Stay quiet and don't come upstairs no matter what you hear." Lena nodded and followed him deeper into the basement workshop, where they crouched behind one of Chester's workbenches. The sound of footsteps on the front porch was followed by aggressive knocking. "Mr. Calder, we know you're in there." Webb's voice carried through the house. "We also know you've been exploring your uncle's collection. This is your last opportunity to discuss this situation reasonably." Jonas heard the front door rattle as someone tested the lock. When that failed, footsteps moved around the house to the back door. The sound of breaking glass told him that Webb and his associates had decided to invite themselves inside. "Search everything," Webb's voice commanded. The old man was clever, but he couldn't have hidden a full laboratory without leaving traces. "Look for recent construction, modified floor plans, anything that doesn't match the original house structure." Jonas held Lena close as they listened to the men moving through the house above them. Furniture was being moved, boxes opened, and papers rustled as Webb's team conducted a thorough search. The invasion felt like a violation of more than just their privacy. It was an attack on the sanctuary that Chester had left them. "Sir, you need to see this," one of the men called from what sounded like the kitchen. "The basement access is here, and there are fresh footprints on the stairs." Jonas realized they were trapped. The only exit from the basement led directly to where Webb's men would be coming down. He looked around desperately for somewhere to hide, but the workshop was too open, with too much equipment to provide adequate cover. "Stay behind the radio," he whispered to Lena, positioning her behind Chester's massive ham radio cabinet. "No matter what happens, don't come out until they're gone." The basement door opened, and Jonas heard footsteps on the wooden stairs. He positioned himself near Chester's workbench, trying to look casual as Webb and one of his associates descended into the workshop. "Mr. Calder," Webb said, his voice carrying false warmth. "I was hoping we could avoid this kind of unpleasantness. Breaking and entering is technically illegal, but I'm sure we can work something out." "Get out of my house," Jonas said, trying to keep his voice steady. Webb smiled, but his eyes remained cold. "Your house, yes, but not your uncle's secrets. We represent the original developers of the technology Chester stole when he left military service. We're simply here to reclaim what belongs to us." "I don't know what you're talking about," Jonas lied. "Of course you do," Webb replied, gesturing to the technical equipment surrounding them. "You've been searching through Chester's collection, probably found some of his old research notes, maybe even discovered one of his hiding places." Webb's associate was examining Chester's workbenches methodically, picking up devices and testing electronic equipment. "This is definitely military-grade hardware," he reported. "Some of it matches descriptions from the Project Blackbird inventory." The name of Chester's classified program made Jonas's blood run cold. These men knew exactly what they were looking for, and they had the resources to find it. "Here's what's going to happen," Webb continued conversationally. "You're going to tell us everything you've learned about your uncle's work. In return, we'll make sure you and your daughter can start fresh somewhere far from here, with enough money to never worry about employment again." "And if I refuse?" Jonas asked. Webb's smile disappeared. "Let's not explore that possibility just yet. I'd prefer to keep this civilized, for everyone's sake." The threat was clear, but Jonas realized he had one advantage: Webb and his men didn't know about the hidden chamber yet. As long as Chester's main laboratory remained undiscovered, Jonas and Lena still had something to bargain with. "I need time to think about your offer," Jonas said. "Of course," Webb replied. 24 hours should be sufficient. We'll be in touch tomorrow evening for your decision." As Webb and his men left the basement, Jonas remained frozen behind the workbench until he heard their car drive away. Only then did he call for Lena to come out of hiding. "Are they going to hurt us, Dad?" she asked, her small face pale with fear. Jonas knelt beside her, trying to project confidence he didn't feel. "Not if we're smart and careful, but we need to find Uncle Chester's laboratory soon. It might be the only thing that can protect us." The prototype key was no larger than a house key, but its design was unlike anything Jonas had ever seen. Made from what appeared to be a specialized metal alloy, it had an intricate pattern of geometric shapes cut into its surface, and when Lena held it up to the light from Chester's old desk lamp, the key seemed to shimmer with an internal luminescence. She had found it exactly where Chester's recorded message had suggested family members would discover it hidden inside the mechanism of an antique mantel clock that had belonged to Jonas's grandmother. The clock hadn't worked in decades, but when Lena had pressed the sequence of numbers that corresponded to the 8-note melody on the clock face, a hidden compartment had opened in the base. "It's warm," Lena observed, turning the key over in her small hands. "Like it has electricity running through it." Jonas examined the key more closely. The metal was warm to the touch, and he could feel a subtle vibration when he held it, as if some kind of energy was flowing through the device. The geometric patterns weren't just decorative, they appeared to be precisely engineered channels, possibly designed to conduct or focus electromagnetic fields. Along with the key, the hidden compartment had contained a folded piece of paper with more of Chester's careful handwriting. "The quantum field stabilizer requires both genetic authentication and harmonic resonance to activate. The key will respond only to direct descendants of the Calder bloodline when exposed to the correct frequency sequence. Use the tone generator to prepare the key, then locate the hidden access panel in the basement workshop. Remember, once you enter the laboratory, there's no going back to ignorance." Jonas had spent the morning after Webb's unwelcome visit searching the basement workshop for any sign of a hidden access panel. He had examined every wall, every piece of equipment, every square inch of the concrete floor, but found nothing that looked like a secret entrance. Now, holding Chester's mysterious key, he wondered if he had been searching in the wrong way. "Dad, I think we need to use the frequency generator first," Lena said, picking up the electronic device they had discovered behind Chester's television. "Uncle Chester's note says the key has to be prepared with the right tones." Jonas nodded and activated the frequency generator. When Lena played the 8-note melody, the device emitted each tone with perfect clarity, and Jonas noticed that the key began to vibrate more noticeably in response to the sounds. By the time the sequence finished, the key was glowing with a soft blue light that pulsed in rhythm with some internal energy source. "Now we find the access panel," Jonas said, but he still had no idea where to look. Lena, however, had developed an intuitive understanding of Chester's thinking that often surpassed her father's more logical approach. She walked directly to Chester's massive ham radio cabinet and began examining its base. "Uncle Chester loved radios," she explained, "and this is the biggest, most important radio in the house. If I were hiding something really secret, I'd put it near the thing I cared about most." Her reasoning made perfect sense. Jonas joined her in examining the radio cabinet, and together they discovered that what appeared to be a solid wooden base was actually a carefully crafted cover. When Jonas pressed against one corner, a section of the base swung away on hidden hinges, revealing an electronic panel embedded in the concrete floor beneath. The panel was about the size of a laptop computer, with a sophisticated display screen and what appeared to be a slot designed to accept Chester's unusual key. But when Jonas inserted the key and tried to turn it, nothing happened. "Maybe it needs both of us," Lena suggested. Uncle Chester's message mentioned genetic authentication. What if it has to sense both our DNA? Jonas was skeptical, but he had learned to trust his daughter's insights about Chester's puzzles. They placed their hands on the panel together, with Jonas holding the key and Lena's small fingers resting on what looked like a scanning surface beside the key slot. The panel immediately came to life, displaying a message in Chester's familiar handwriting. "Welcome, Jonas and Lena Calder. Genetic scan confirmed. Preparing laboratory access." The floor beneath the radio cabinet began to move, sliding away to reveal a metal staircase descending into darkness. Warm air rose from the opening, carrying the scent of electronics and something else ozone, like the smell after a lightning storm. "Uncle Chester built a secret laboratory under the basement," Lena whispered in amazement. Jonas felt a mixture of excitement and apprehension as he peered down the staircase. Chester's recorded warnings about dangerous people and irreversible choices echoed in his mind. But their encounter with Webb had made it clear that they were already in danger whether they explored the laboratory or not. "Stay close to me," he told Lena as they began their descent. The staircase led to a corridor lined with the same kind of metal paneling Jonas had seen in military facilities. Overhead lights activated automatically as they walked, revealing that the underground laboratory was far more extensive than Jonas had imagined. The corridor branched in several directions, with signs indicating different research areas: harmonic generation, quantum field laboratory, consciousness interface research. The main laboratory was a marvel of precision engineering. Chester had created a fully functional research facility beneath his house, complete with advanced electronic equipment, computer terminals, and what appeared to be a prototype of the device shown in the blueprint fragments they had found upstairs. The prototype stood in the center of the laboratory, a cylindrical chamber, about 8 feet tall and 4 feet in diameter, constructed from the same unusual metal alloy as the key. Complex geometric patterns covered its surface, and multiple cables connected it to banks of electronic equipment that hummed with barely contained energy. "The resonance engine," Jonas breathed, recognizing the device from Chester's descriptions. Beside the prototype was a computer terminal with a note taped to the screen. "For Jonas and Lenaif, you found this laboratory. Then the outside world has become too dangerous for you to remain ignorant of what I've discovered. The attached files contain everything you need to understand the resonance engine and its implications. But be warned, this knowledge comes with responsibilities that will change your lives forever." Jonas activated the computer terminal and found hundreds of files documenting Chester's research over several decades. Technical specifications, test results, theoretical papers, and personal logs that revealed the full scope of his uncle's achievement. The resonance engine wasn't just an energy generator, it was a device that could tap into what Chester called quantum vacuum fluctuations, drawing unlimited clean energy from the fundamental structure of space itself. But more than that, Chester had discovered that the device responded to human consciousness, amplifying the focused intentions of its operators in ways that bordered on the miraculous. "It's like magic," Lena said, studying the images on the computer screen. "But it's really science. Advanced science that most people wouldn't understand," Jonas agreed. No wonder Uncle Chester had to hide it. As they explored the laboratory files, Jonas began to understand the magnitude of Chester's discovery. The resonance engine represented a technology that could solve the world's energy problems overnight, but it also had military applications that would fundamentally shift the balance of global power. Any government or corporation that controlled this technology would have an enormous advantage over their competitors. Chester's personal logs revealed his growing paranoia in his later years, and Jonas now understood why. His uncle had possessed something that multiple organizations would kill to obtain, and he had spent decades living with the knowledge that discovery would mean death. "Dad," Lena said quietly, "we're not going to give this to the bad men, are we?" Jonas looked at his daughter, then at the miraculous device Chester had created. Whatever they decided to do with Chester's invention would determine not just their own future, but potentially the future of humanity itself. "No, sweetheart," he said finally. "We're going to figure out how to use Uncle Chester's gift the right way." The video message was hidden inside Chester's old television set, just as his radio message had been embedded in the ham radio system. But this recording was different, more recent, more urgent, and filled with information that changed everything Jonas thought he knew about his uncle's fate. Chester's face appeared on the television screen as soon as Jonas activated the hidden playback system, and Jonas was struck by how much older his uncle looked than in the military photographs they had found. His hair was completely grey, his face lined with the weight of decades spent in hiding, but his eyes still held the sharp intelligence Jonas remembered from childhood. "If you're watching this, Jonas, then you've found my laboratory and begun to understand what I've been protecting," Chester's recorded image said. "But there's something else you need to know, something I couldn't risk putting in the radio transmission." Chester paused, looking directly into the camera with an expression of profound sadness. "I'm not dead, Jonas. My death was staged, necessary to throw off the people who have been hunting me for 30 years. I've been living in a secure facility, continuing my research, waiting for the right time to emerge and reveal what I've discovered to the world." Jonas felt his legs give out, and he sat down heavily in Chester's old recliner. Beside him, Lena stared at the television screen with wide eyes, processing the impossible news that their great-uncle was alive. "The resonance engine you found in the laboratory is only a prototype," Chester continued. "I've built a full-scale version in my current location, and I've confirmed that it works exactly as my theories predicted. The device can generate unlimited clean energy, but more importantly, it can amplify human consciousness in ways that could transform our species." The camera angle shifted, and Jonas could see that Chester was speaking from what appeared to be another laboratory, this one even more sophisticated than the one hidden beneath the house. "The consciousness interface component I mentioned is the key to everything. The resonance engine doesn't just convert quantum vacuum energy into usable power, it creates a feedback loop with human thought patterns, allowing focused intention to direct and amplify the energy output in ways that seem impossible." Chester leaned closer to the camera, his voice dropping to an urgent whisper. "I've discovered that our consciousness isn't confined to our brains, Jonas. It's connected to the quantum field that underlies all reality. The resonance engine simply provides a technological interface to access that connection. In the right hands, it could heal the sick, restore damaged ecosystems, even extend human life indefinitely. But in the wrong hands..." The recording flickered, and when it stabilized, Chester's expression had grown grave. "The people hunting me aren't just interested in the energy applications. They've realized that the consciousness interface could be weaponized, used to control or manipulate human thoughts on a massive scale. They want to turn my discovery into the ultimate tool of oppression." Jonas felt a chill run down his spine. The implications of what Chester was describing went far beyond anything he had imagined. "There's a group called the Prometheus Initiative," Chester continued. "They claim to be a private research consortium, but they're actually backed by military intelligence agencies from multiple countries. They've been developing their own version of consciousness manipulation technology, and they believe my work holds the key to perfecting their programs." The video shifted again, showing Chester standing beside a device that dwarfed the prototype in the basement laboratory. This version of the resonance engine was the size of a small building, with crystalline components that seemed to pulse with internal light. I've spent the last decade building this full-scale version and testing its capabilities. The results exceed even my most optimistic projections. A single device could provide clean energy for an entire continent, while simultaneously enhancing the cognitive abilities of everyone within its field of influence. But the same technology that could usher in a new golden age for humanity could also enslave every mind on Earth. Lena moved closer to Jonas, instinctively seeking comfort as Chester's warnings grew more ominous. The prototype in the basement laboratory is functional but limited, Chester explained. I designed it as a teaching tool, something that would allow my family to understand the principles involved without accessing the full power of the technology. But even that prototype will be enough to convince the Prometheus Initiative that you found my work. Chester's image flickered again, and when it returned, he was holding what appeared to be a small, crystalline device. This is a quantum communication beacon, he said. I've hidden one in the laboratory beneath your house. If you activate it, I'll know that you've discovered my secret, and I'll begin the process of emerging from hiding. But Jonas, you need to understand, once you activate that beacon, there's no going back. The Prometheus Initiative will detect the signal, and they'll mobilize every resource they have to capture you, Lena, and the technology. The weight of the decision Chester was asking them to make settled on Jonas like a physical burden. They could ignore the beacon, pretend they had never found the laboratory, and try to live normal lives. But Webb and his associates had already found them, and Jonas doubted they would be allowed to simply walk away from Chester's secrets. If you choose to activate the beacon, Chester continued, you'll be committing yourself and Lena to a path that will put you in constant danger until we can find a way to make the technology public and prevent it from being monopolized by any single group. But if you don't activate it, the Prometheus Initiative will eventually find the prototype anyway, and they'll use it to locate my full-scale device. Chester's expression softened, and for a moment he looked like the eccentric Uncle Jonas remembered from family gatherings. I know I'm asking a lot of you, Jonas. You didn't choose this responsibility, and it's not fair that Lena has to grow up in the shadow of my work. But she's special. I can see it in the genetic markers, the same intuitive connection to quantum fields that her grandmother possessed. Lena may be the key to ensuring that humanity uses this technology wisely. The recording began to fade, but Chester's final words came through clearly. The beacon is hidden behind the main control panel of the prototype. If you decide to activate it, place your hand on the crystalline surface and think clearly about making contact with me. The quantum entanglement between the beacon and my device will carry your intention across any distance. But remember, once you make that choice, your old lives will be over forever. The television screen went dark, leaving Jonas and Lena sitting in the underground laboratory with the most important decision of their lives ahead of them. Above them, Jonas could hear the sound of vehicles in their driveway. Webb had returned, probably with more men and less patience than he had shown during his previous visits. "Dad," Lena whispered, "Uncle Chester is really alive." "It sounds like it, sweetheart," Jonas replied, still struggling to process everything they had learned. "And he needs our help?" Jonas looked at his daughter's face, seeing the same determination that had helped her solve Chester's puzzles. "Yes, I think he does." The sound of breaking glass from upstairs told them that Webb's men were no longer bothering with polite requests for entry. Whatever decision Jonas and Lena made about Chester's beacon, they needed to make it quickly. "What do you think we should do?" Jonas asked, realizing that his 8-year-old daughter might have better judgment about this situation than he did. Lena looked at the resonance engine prototype, then at the television screen where Chester's image had been. "Uncle Chester trusted us with his secret," she said simply. "We should trust him too." Jonas nodded, knowing she was right. They moved to the prototype device and found the hidden panel Chester had described. Behind it was a crystalline object about the size of a smartphone, glowing with the same soft blue light they had seen in Chester's key. As footsteps echoed down the staircase to the laboratory, Jonas placed his hand on the beacon and focused his thoughts on a single, clear intention. "We need help, Chester." We're ready to do whatever it takes to protect your work and make sure it's used for good." The beacon flared with brilliant light, and Jonas felt a strange sensation, as if his consciousness had expanded beyond the boundaries of his physical body. For just a moment, he sensed another presence, distant but unmistakably real, acknowledging his call for help. Then Webb's voice echoed through the laboratory. "Well, well, it seems the Calder family has more surprises than we anticipated." The laboratory access panel was more sophisticated than anything Jonas had imagined possible, even after discovering Chester's underground research facility. Hidden beneath what appeared to be a simple metal grate near the resonance engine prototype, the panel revealed itself only when both Jonas and Lena placed their hands on its biometric scanners simultaneously. "Genetic authentication confirmed," the panel announced in a synthesized voice. "Dual family member access protocol activated. Welcome to Sanctuary Level 2. Jonas felt his heart skip a beat. Sanctuary Level 2 implied there had been a Level 1 and possibly others. How deep did Chester's preparations go? The panel slid aside to reveal another staircase, this one leading even deeper underground. But before Jonas and Lena could explore further, they heard Marcus Webb's voice echoing from the level above them. "Seal the upper laboratory," Webb commanded his men. "If they've activated any kind of communication system, we need to prevent outside contact while we secure the technology." Jonas realized they had walked into a trap. By activating Chester's quantum beacon, they had not only summoned help from their uncle, they had also alerted Webb's organization to the exact location of the hidden laboratory. "Dad, we have to go deeper," Lena whispered, pointing toward the newly revealed staircase. "Uncle Chester wouldn't have built this unless we needed it." They descended quickly, the staircase spiraling down into what felt like the Earth's core. Motion-activated lights illuminated their path, revealing that this level of Chester's facility was even more sophisticated than the laboratory above. The walls were lined with what appeared to be advanced shielding material, and the air hummed with the barely audible vibration of powerful electronic systems. The corridor at the bottom of the staircase opened into a control room that looked like something from a science fiction movie. Multiple screens lined the walls, displaying data streams, security camera feeds, and what appeared to be real-time readings from sensors throughout the house and surrounding area. But what stopped Jonas in his tracks was the figure sitting calmly in a chair before the main control console. Chester Calder turned around and smiled at them, exactly as he had appeared in the video message, but somehow more solid, more real, more present than Jonas had expected. "Hello, Jonas," Chester said, his voice carrying the same dry humor Jonas remembered from childhood. "Hello, Lena. I was wondering when you two would make it down here." Jonas stared at his uncle, his mind struggling to process what he was seeing. "You're really alive? You've been here the whole time?" "Not the whole time," Chester replied, standing up from his chair with the careful movements of a man in his 70s. "But I've been monitoring the house since you moved in, waiting to see if you would discover my work and what you would choose to do with it." Lena ran to Chester and hugged him without hesitation, displaying the kind of trust that children reserve for family members who have proven themselves worthy of it. Chester knelt down and embraced her, his eyes bright with genuine affection. "You've done wonderfully, little one," he told her. "Your intuition about my puzzles was better than I could have hoped for." "Uncle Chester," Jonas said, still trying to wrap his mind around the situation. "Webb and his men are in the laboratory upstairs. They know about the prototype, and they're looking for us." Chester nodded calmly. "Marcus Webb represents the Prometheus Initiative, just as I explained in my message. They've been hunting me for 3 decades, and they finally tracked my work to this location when you activated the quantum beacon." "Then we're trapped," Jonas said. "They have men surrounding the house, and we're underground with no way out." Chester's smile widened. "Jonas, you're thinking like someone who believes in conventional limitations, but we're not dealing with conventional technology here." He gestured toward the screens lining the control room walls. Jonas could see security camera feeds showing Webb's men positioned throughout the house and around the property. There were at least a dozen armed individuals, far more than Jonas had realized. The Prometheus initiative wants my technology, Chester continued, but they fundamentally misunderstand what they're dealing with. They think the resonance engine is just an advanced energy generator that can be mass-produced and weaponized. They have no comprehension of the consciousness interface component. Chester moved to the main control console and began activating systems with practiced efficiency. The screens around them came alive with data streams and technical readouts that meant nothing to Jonas, but clearly represented enormous complexity. The consciousness interface isn't just a feature of the technology, Chester explained as he worked. It's the core principle that makes everything else possible. The device doesn't generate energy from quantum vacuum fluctuations. It allows human consciousness to access and direct energy that was always there, waiting for us to evolve enough to perceive it. One of the screens showed a three-dimensional representation of the house and surrounding area, with energy patterns flowing through the structure like luminous rivers. "I've spent 30 years preparing for this moment," Chester said, "not just developing the technology, but creating the conditions necessary for it to be revealed to the world in a way that prevents any single group from controlling it." He turned to face Jonas and Lena, his expression growing serious. "The prototype upstairs isn't actually a prototype, Jonas. It's a complete, fully functional resonance engine, calibrated specifically for this location and this moment. I've been using it to maintain a quantum field around the entire property, a field that's been slowly expanding and strengthening for decades." Jonas felt a chill of understanding. "You've been preparing a demonstration." "More than that," Chester replied. "I've been preparing a transformation. When Webb and his men try to remove the device from this location, they'll trigger a cascade reaction that will activate every piece of equipment in the house simultaneously. The resulting field effect will be visible from space and impossible to suppress or contain." Lena looked up at Chester with complete trust. "Will it hurt people?" Chester knelt down beside her again. "No, little one. The field will enhance consciousness, not harm it. People within its influence will experience expanded awareness, increased empathy, and enhanced cognitive abilities. But they'll also become immune to the kind of mental manipulation that the Prometheus initiative specializes in." He stood up and returned his attention to the control systems. "The technology can't be weaponized because it fundamentally changes the consciousness of anyone who tries to use it for harmful purposes. A person operating the resonance engine with malicious intent will find their own awareness expanded to the point where they can no longer maintain malicious thoughts." Jonas began to understand the elegance of Chester's plan. By allowing Webb to discover the laboratory and attempt to steal the technology, Chester was ensuring that the demonstration would happen under conditions that would make it impossible for any government or corporation to claim ownership of the discovery. "But what about us?" Jonas asked. "We'll be at the center of this field effect when it activates." Chester's smile returned. "You and Lena have been exposed to quantum field influences since you moved into the house. Your consciousness has already begun adapting to the expanded awareness that the full activation will bring. You'll experience the transformation more gradually and comfortably than the men upstairs." On the security screens, Jonas could see Webb's team setting up equipment around the resonance engine prototype. They had apparently decided to remove the device from the laboratory, exactly as Chester had predicted. "How long do we have?" Jonas asked. "Minutes," Chester replied. "Once they attempt to disconnect the device from its power source, the cascade will begin automatically. The quantum field that's been building around this property for 30 years will discharge all at once, creating a demonstration that will change how humanity understands consciousness, energy, and our place in the universe." Lena tugged on Chester's sleeve. "Uncle Chester, will my daddy and I be okay?" Chester knelt down one more time and took both of Lena's small hands in his. "More than okay, sweetheart. You're going to help your daddy and me show the world something wonderful. Something that will make sure no one ever has to be afraid or hungry or alone again." Above them, alarms began sounding as Webb's men started their attempt to extract the resonance engine. Chester moved to a final control panel and placed his hand on what appeared to be a quantum beacon, similar to the one Jonas had activated earlier. "Are you ready?" Chester asked, looking at both Jonas and Lena. Jonas took his daughter's hand and nodded. Whatever was about to happen, they would face it together as a family. Chester activated the beacon, and the entire underground facility began to vibrate with barely contained energy. The transformation that would change everything was about to begin. The complete energy device that Chester had spent 3 decades perfecting was far more beautiful and terrifying than Jonas had imagined. Through the security monitors in the underground control room, he watched Webb's men struggle to understand what they were attempting to steal, as the prototype in the laboratory above began to resonate with harmonics that seemed to come from the Earth itself. "They have no idea what they're touching," Chester said, his fingers dancing across control panels with the practiced precision of a concert pianist. "The Prometheus Initiative thinks they're dealing with conventional technology that can be transported and reverse-engineered. They don't understand that consciousness-responsive quantum fields can't be contained or controlledly guided." On the main screen, Jonas could see Webb directing his team with increasing urgency. The man's confidence from their earlier encounters had been replaced by barely controlled frustration as his technical specialists struggled to make sense of Chester's device. Every attempt to disconnect the prototype from its power source triggered warning alarms and caused the crystalline components to glow more brightly. "The cascade is beginning," Chester announced, pointing to a series of readouts that showed energy levels rising throughout the house and surrounding property. 30 years of accumulated quantum field potential is about to discharge in a single coordinated pulse. Lena pressed closer to Jonas, her small hand gripping his with surprising strength. "Dad, I can feel it happening. It's like the whole house is waking up." Jonas realized his daughter was right. Even in the shielded control room, he could sense something changing in the very fabric of reality around them. The air itself seemed to vibrate with potential, and he found his thoughts becoming clearer and more focused than he had ever experienced. "The consciousness interface is already beginning to affect you," Chester explained. "Your awareness is expanding to perceive quantum field fluctuations directly. Most people never develop this sensitivity, but it appears to run in our family bloodline." Chester moved to what appeared to be the main control station, a sophisticated console that looked more like an altar than conventional electronics. At its center sat a crystalline sphere about the size of a basketball, glowing with the same blue light Jonas had seen in the various components of Chester's technology. "This is the heart of the system," Chester said, his voice taking on a reverent tone. "The consciousness interface core. It's been slowly building a quantum entanglement network that connects every piece of equipment in the house, every electronic device in the neighborhood, and ultimately every conscious mind within a 50-mile radius." Jonas felt his breath catch. 50 miles? Chester, that includes hundreds of thousands of people." "Exactly," Chester replied, his eyes bright with an emotion Jonas couldn't quite identify. "When the cascade completes, every person within the field will experience a temporary expansion of consciousness. They'll perceive reality from a broader perspective, understand their connection to the quantum field that underlies all existence, and most importantly, become immune to the kind of mental manipulation that organizations like the Prometheus Initiative depend on." On the security monitors, Jonas could see that Webb's men had finally managed to begin disconnecting the prototype from its mounting brackets. The moment they lifted the device, every screen in the control room flashed red, and a deep harmonic tone began emanating from the walls themselves. "Cascade initiation confirmed," Chester announced, his voice rising with excitement. "All quantum field generators are now entering synchronized resonance. Field expansion will reach maximum extent in approximately 12 minutes. Jonas watched in fascination as the three-dimensional display showed energy patterns spreading outward from their location, like ripples in a cosmic pond. The patterns were beautiful, flowing in spirals and geometric forms that seemed to follow the natural topology of consciousness itself. "Uncle Chester," Lena said, her voice carrying a strange quality that Jonas had never heard before. "I can see the patterns in my mind. They're connecting to people everywhere, like a giant web of light. Chester knelt beside Lena, studying her face with intense interest. You're perceiving the quantum entanglement network directly, aren't you, without any technological interface? Lena nodded, her eyes wide with wonder. It's beautiful, Uncle Chester. I can feel all the people, their thoughts and feelings and dreams. They're all connected, but most of them don't know it yet. Jonas felt a moment of paternal concern. Is this safe for her? She's just a child. She's more than just a child, Chester replied, his voice filled with awe. Lena appears to have a natural sensitivity to quantum consciousness fields that's far beyond anything I've documented. She may be the first member of our species to develop these abilities organically, without technological assistance. The security monitors showed increasing chaos in the laboratory above. Webb's men were struggling to maintain control as their electronic equipment began malfunctioning. Radios crackled with interference, computers displayed impossible data streams, and the prototype device itself had begun levitating several inches above the floor, suspended by forces that conventional physics couldn't explain. "Sir, we need to evacuate immediately." Jonas could hear one of Webb's technicians reporting through the security system. The device is exhibiting properties that don't match any known technology. Energy readings are off the charts, and we're detecting field effects that could be dangerous to human physiology. But Webb's response was exactly what Chester had predicted. Negative. We're not leaving without that device. If it's more advanced than our intelligence suggested, that makes it even more valuable. Continue extraction procedures. Chester shook his head sadly. Marcus Webb represents everything that's wrong with how humanity approaches new technology. Instead of trying to understand it, instead of considering how it might benefit everyone, his first instinct is to control and weaponize it. The harmonic tone that had been emanating from the walls was growing stronger, and Jonas could feel it resonating in his bones. More than that, he could feel it resonating in his thoughts themselves, as if the sound was somehow harmonizing with the electrical patterns in his brain. "Chester, what exactly is going to happen when this cascade reaches full intensity?" Jonas asked. Chester moved to a bank of monitors showing real-time brain activity patterns from sensors throughout the house and surrounding area. Every conscious mind within the field will experience what I call consciousness resonance. Their individual awareness will temporarily synchronize with the quantum field that connects all matter and energy in the universe. They'll understand, on a direct experiential level, that consciousness isn't produced by the brain, it's a fundamental property of reality itself. The implications were staggering. Jonas tried to imagine hundreds of thousands of people suddenly experiencing expanded consciousness simultaneously. Won't that cause panic? Initially, perhaps, Chester admitted, but the expansion brings with it an increased capacity for empathy and understanding. People will realize that harming others ultimately harms themselves, because at the quantum level, we're all aspects of the same unified consciousness experiencing itself from different perspectives. On the screens, Jonas could see that the effects were already beginning to manifest in the laboratory above. Webb's men were moving more slowly, their aggressive postures softening as the expanding field began to influence their consciousness. Several of them had stopped working entirely and were staring at the levitating prototype with expressions of wonder rather than greed. "Look at their faces," Lena said softly. "They're starting to understand." But Webb himself seemed to be resisting the field effects through sheer force of will. "Focus on the mission," he barked at his men. "Don't let some kind of psychoactive field manipulation interfere with your training. We have a job to complete." Chester frowned as he watched Webb's continued resistance. Interesting. He's been conditioned to maintain rigid mental barriers against consciousness, expanding influences. The Prometheus Initiative has apparently developed techniques for protecting their operatives from exactly this kind of field effect. "Is that bad?" Jonas asked. "It means Webb won't experience the empathy expansion that should prevent him from trying to weaponize the technology," Chester replied. "He'll remain dangerous even after the cascade completes." The energy readings on Chester's instruments were approaching critical levels. The quantum field expansion was now spreading beyond the immediate property, reaching into the surrounding neighborhood and beyond. Jonas could see from the three-dimensional display that thousands of people were about to experience consciousness resonance for the first time in human history. 7 minutes to maximum field extent, Chester announced. Jonas, Lena, I need you both to place your hands on the consciousness interface core. Your direct family connection to the field will help stabilize the expansion and ensure it manifests as enhancement rather than disruption. Jonas looked at the glowing crystalline sphere at the center of Chester's control console. What will happen to us? You'll become the focal points for the field expansion, Chester explained. Your consciousness will temporarily merge with the quantum field itself, allowing you to guide how the technology manifests for everyone within its influence. You'll have the power to ensure that this transformation serves humanity's highest good. Lena was already reaching toward the crystal, her small face serene with anticipation. It wants us to touch it, Dad. It's been waiting for us. Jonas took a deep breath and placed his hand on the warm, pulsing surface of the consciousness interface core. Immediately, his awareness exploded beyond the boundaries of his individual identity. He could perceive the thoughts and feelings of every person within the expanding field, could sense the quantum connections that linked all matter and energy in the universe, could feel the infinite potential that lay dormant within human consciousness. Beside him, Lena's touch on the crystal created a harmony of awareness that was indescribably beautiful. Together, father and daughter became conduits for a transformation that would change not just their own lives, but the fundamental relationship between humanity and the cosmos itself. The cascade was entering its final phase, and the real confrontation was about to begin. Chester's decoy device was a masterpiece of misdirection, identical to the real resonance engine in every visible detail, but fundamentally different in its quantum structure. As Webb's men finally succeeded in lifting what they believed was Chester's revolutionary invention, Jonas watched from the underground control room as the decoy began its carefully programmed performance. Activation sequence confirmed, Chester announced, his eyes fixed on the monitors showing Webb's team. The decoy will provide exactly the kind of impressive display they expect while masking the true source of the consciousness field expansion. The fake device began to levitate more dramatically, spinning slowly in the air while projecting holographic displays of complex mathematical equations. Lights pulsed in rhythm with harmonic tones that filled the laboratory, creating exactly the kind of spectacular demonstration that would convince Webb's superiors that they had captured Chester's technology. But Jonas, his consciousness still expanded through contact with the real interface core, could perceive what was actually happening. The true resonance engine was the entire house-savory piece of equipment, every carefully placed component, every quantum field generator that Chester had installed over 3 decades of patient preparation. The device Webb was stealing was merely the most visible element of a technology that had been integrated into the fabric of reality itself. They'll never understand what they actually have, Chester said with satisfaction. The decoy will function perfectly for basic energy generation, even provide some limited consciousness interface effects. But it's missing the quantum entanglement network that makes the real technology revolutionary. On the security monitors, Jonas could see Webb directing his men to transport the levitating device toward the laboratory exit. The man's face showed a mixture of triumph and barely controlled greed as he supervised what he believed was the theft of the century. "Sir, the readings are unlike anything we've ever documented," one of Webb's technicians reported. "This device appears to be tapping directly into zero-point energy fields. The applications are practically unlimited." Webb's response was exactly what Chester had predicted. "Excellent. Prepare it for immediate transport to the secure facility. Our employers will want to begin reverse engineering immediately." But as Webb's team maneuvered the decoy device up the stairs from the laboratory, the real transformation was accelerating. Jonas could feel the consciousness field expanding outward from their location, like a wave of pure awareness, touching minds throughout the surrounding area. "Dad," Lena whispered, her small hand still pressed against the interface core. "People are waking up everywhere. I can feel them starting to understand." Jonas opened his expanded awareness to perceive what his daughter was sensing. Throughout the neighborhood, throughout the city, people were stopping their daily activities as the consciousness field reached them. They stood motionless for moments, eyes wide with wonder, as their individual awareness briefly merged with the infinite perspective of the quantum field. A mother playing with her children in a nearby park suddenly understood the profound connection between all living things. A businessman stuck in traffic realized that his pursuit of wealth was meaningless compared to the love he felt for his family. An elderly man sitting alone in his apartment felt the loneliness that had plagued him for years dissolve as he perceived his fundamental unity with all existence. "The expansion is reaching its maximum extent," Chester announced. "Field effects are now active across a 50-mile radius. Approximately 800,000 people are experiencing consciousness resonance simultaneously." On the monitors, Jonas could see that Webb's men had successfully transported the decoy device to ground level and were loading it into a specially equipped truck. But their movements had become strangely synchronized, as if they were all responding to the same unheard rhythm. "Even the Prometheus Initiative operatives are being affected," Chester observed. "Their conditioning can't completely protect them from direct exposure to consciousness field resonance." Webb himself seemed to be the only person maintaining complete resistance to the field effects. He moved with the same aggressive efficiency as before, barking orders at his men and coordinating the extraction operation with military precision. "Get that device secured and initiate departure protocols," Webb commanded. "We need to be mobile before local authorities respond to whatever these field effects are causing." But as Webb's truck began to pull away from the house, Jonas felt something shift in the quantum field patterns. The consciousness interface core beneath his palm grew warmer, and Lena's eyes widened with sudden understanding. "Uncle Chester," she said urgently, "the bad man isn't finished. He's going to try to hurt people with the fake device." Chester frowned as he examined his instruments. "Impossible. The decoy doesn't have the power to—" He stopped mid-sentence as new readings appeared on his screens. "No. He's not planning to use the device as a weapon. He's planning to use it as bait." Jonas felt his heart sink as he understood Chester's realization. Webb wasn't just stealing the technology, he was using the dramatic theft as a distraction, while other Prometheus Initiative operatives moved to capture Jonas, Lena, and Chester himself. "There are more teams," Chester said grimly, pointing to new contacts appearing on his security sensors. "They're surrounding the property while we're focused on the primary extraction." Webb was never interested in just the device, he wants the people who created it. The real confrontation was just beginning, and Jonas realized that protecting Chester's technology might require sacrifices he wasn't prepared to make. The patent documents that Chester had hidden throughout the house for 3 decades suddenly became the most important papers in human history. As Jonas maintained contact with the consciousness interface core, he realized that his uncle had been preparing for this moment since the day he had faked his own death, not just technologically, but legally. Every component, every principle, every application of the resonance engine technology has been documented and filed with patent offices in 47 countries. Chester explained as alarms continued to sound from the security systems. But the patents were filed under sealed military classification, accessible only under specific circumstances. Jonas could see Webb's reinforcement teams closing in on the house through the underground facility's perimeter sensors. Men in tactical gear were positioning themselves at every possible exit, while electronic surveillance equipment scanned for signs of the real laboratory. "What circumstances?" Jonas asked, though part of his expanded consciousness already knew the answer. "Public demonstration of the technology's consciousness enhancement capabilities," Chester replied. The moment the field expansion reached its maximum extent and affected 800,000 people simultaneously, automatic triggers activated in government databases worldwide. The classified patents are now entering the public domain. Lena's grip on the interface core tightened, and Jonas could feel her awareness reaching out to touch the minds of people throughout the affected area. Uncle Chester, everyone who felt the field expansion knows about the patents now. They understand what the technology can do, and they want to protect it. Jonas opened his own consciousness to perceive what Lena was sensing. Throughout the 50-mile radius affected by the consciousness field, people were accessing the newly declassified patent documents through government websites that had been programmed to release the information automatically. Scientists, engineers, and ordinary citizens were downloading the complete technical specifications for Chester's resonance engine technology. Brilliant, Jonas breathed, understanding the elegance of his uncle's plan. You've made it impossible for any single organization to monopolize the technology. By the time Webb realizes what's happened, millions of people will have access to the complete blueprints. Chester nodded, but his expression remained grave. The legal protection is only the beginning. Webb and the Prometheus Initiative won't be stopped by patent filings. They'll try to capture us and force us to build customized versions of the technology for their specific applications. On the security monitors, Jonas could see that Webb himself had returned to the house. He stood in the main laboratory, staring at the space where the decoy device had been, his face twisted with rage as he realized he had been outmaneuvered. "Sweep every room," Webb commanded his men. "They're still here somewhere, and they have access to the real technology. Find them." But Webb's men were moving more slowly than before, their aggressive postures continuing to soften as the consciousness field effects deepened their exposure to expanded awareness. Several of them had stopped following orders entirely, instead standing motionless with expressions of profound wonder. "Sir, the field effects are intensifying," one of Webb's technicians reported. "Our conditioning protocols aren't sufficient to maintain operational focus. Request permission to withdraw to minimum safe distance." Webb's response was immediate and harsh. "Negative. Activate the consciousness dampening equipment. We're not leaving without the primary targets." Jonas felt a chill as he watched Webb's men deploy devices he had never seen before, sophisticated electronic equipment that began projecting what appeared to be counter-resonance fields. The effect on the consciousness expansion was immediate and disturbing, like watching beautiful music being drowned out by discordant noise. "They've developed suppression technology," Chester said grimly. "I theorized this was possible, but I hoped they hadn't progressed to practical applications." The consciousness-dampening fields were creating zones of mental isolation throughout the house, severing the quantum connections that allowed expanded awareness. Jonas could feel his own enhanced perception beginning to fade in some areas, though the interface core maintained its connection in the shielded underground facility. "They're trying to cut us off from the field network," Lena said, her voice carrying a note of distress that Jonas had never heard before. "I can still feel the people outside, but the connection is getting weaker." Chester moved quickly to a secondary control panel and began activating systems that Jonas hadn't seen before. "Emergency protocols," he explained. "If the consciousness field is being suppressed, we need to shift to the backup plan." "There's a backup plan?" Jonas asked. "The patent documents were just the first line of defense," Chester replied, his fingers flying over the controls. "But the real protection comes from the technology itself. Watch." On the main display, Jonas could see the three-dimensional representation of the consciousness field as it responded to Webb's suppression equipment. Instead of simply fading, the field began to adapt, shifting its resonance frequencies to work around the dampening zones. "The quantum entanglement network is self-modifying," Chester explained. "Every attempt to suppress consciousness expansion actually teaches the system how to overcome that specific type of interference. Webb's equipment is making the field stronger, not weaker." Jonas watched in amazement as the field patterns flowed like water around obstacles, finding new pathways to maintain the connections between expanded minds. The people throughout the 50-mile radius who had experienced consciousness resonance were now working together unconsciously, their collective awareness adapting to maintain the network despite technological interference. "It's alive," Lena whispered in wonder. "The field is learning and growing and becoming more than Uncle Chester designed it to be." Chester knelt beside her, his eyes bright with scientific fascination. "You're right, little one. The consciousness interface has evolved beyond my original parameters. It's become a truly collaborative intelligence, guided by the collective intention of everyone within its influence." But Webb wasn't finished. Jonas could see through the security monitors that the man had pulled out what appeared to be a military-grade communication device and was calling for additional support. "Priority Alpha authorization," Webb spoke into the device. "Request immediate deployment of the Prometheus protocol. We have confirmed contact with the consciousness technology, and civilian population exposure has exceeded acceptable parameters." Chester's face went pale. "The Prometheus protocol. I had hoped they would never develop it to operational status." "What is it?" Jonas asked, though he wasn't sure he wanted to know the answer. "Weaponized consciousness suppression," Chester replied grimly. "Instead of just blocking expanded awareness, it actively degrades human consciousness, reducing people to a state where they can't think independently or resist authoritarian control. It's everything I've spent my life trying to prevent." The implications were horrifying. Jonas realized that Webb's organization wasn't just interested in stealing Chester's technology, they were prepared to destroy human consciousness itself, rather than allow it to evolve naturally. "How long before they can deploy it?" Jonas asked. Chester checked his instruments and frowned. "The equipment is already airborne. Military transport aircraft carrying Prometheus protocol transmitters are approaching the area. They'll begin broadcasting suppression fields in approximately 8 minutes. Lena's hand pressed more firmly against the interface core, and Jonas could feel her consciousness reaching out to touch every mind within the expanded awareness network. "Uncle Chester, all the people who felt the field, they know what's coming. They're scared, but they want to help." Jonas opened his own awareness and felt what Lena was perceiving. Throughout the region, hundreds of thousands of people were experiencing a form of collective determination he had never imagined possible. They understood that their expanded consciousness was under attack, and they were prepared to defend it. "They're not just defending the technology," Jonas realized. "They're defending their own evolution." Chester nodded solemnly. "This is the moment I've been preparing for since I first discovered the consciousness interface principles. Humanity is choosing between two paths: expanded awareness and empathetic connection, or technological control and mental slavery." The sound of aircraft engines grew audible even in the underground facility. Webb's reinforcements were arriving, and the final confrontation was about to begin. "What do we do?" Jonas asked, looking at his uncle and daughter, two people who represented both the past and future of human consciousness. Chester placed his own hand on the interface core, joining Jonas and Lena in direct contact with the quantum field network. "We trust in the technology we've unleashed and the people it's connected. The consciousness field has grown beyond anything I originally designed. Now it's up to humanity itself to determine how this story ends." Above them, Jonas could hear Webb's men beginning their final assault on the underground facility. The battle for the future of human consciousness was about to reach its climax. Lena's inheritance box sat on the kitchen table, where Chester had left it 3 months after the consciousness field expansion changed everything. The small wooden container, carved with the same geometric patterns that had appeared throughout Chester's technology, contained items that represented not just the past, but the unlimited potential of the future. Jonas watched his daughter examine each object with the careful attention she had inherited from both her great-uncle and the expanded awareness that now connected her to the quantum field permanently. At 9 years old, Lena had become something unprecedented in human history, a child born into normal consciousness who had evolved naturally into a state of permanent quantum awareness. "This was Grandma Sarah's notebook," Lena said, holding up a leather-bound journal filled with her great-grandmother's research notes. Uncle Chester says she was the first in our family to sense the quantum connections, even though she didn't have the technology to prove they existed. Jonas nodded, still amazed by how much their understanding of their family history had expanded. Chester's revelations after the consciousness field activation had included the discovery that the Calder family had carried genetic markers for quantum sensitivity for generations. Lena's grandmother, mother, and now Lena herself represented an evolutionary development that made them natural interfaces between human consciousness and the fundamental structure of reality. The transformation that had begun 3 months ago was still spreading. The consciousness field expansion had affected 800,000 people initially, but those individuals had become seeds for further expansion. Each person who experienced quantum awareness naturally developed the ability to facilitate the same expansion in others. Governments and corporations worldwide were struggling to adapt to a population that could no longer be controlled through traditional methods of manipulation and propaganda. "The Prometheus Initiative has been disbanded," Jonas said, reading from a news report on his tablet. Marcus Webb and his associates are facing trial for crimes against humanity, though most of them have been granted clemency in exchange for cooperation with the Global Consciousness Research Initiative. Chester looked up from the advanced electronics he was assembling at the opposite end of the kitchen table. At 75, he had emerged from 30 years of hiding to become humanity's leading expert on consciousness-responsive technology, working with scientists worldwide to ensure the peaceful development of quantum awareness applications. Webb's conditioning made him immune to empathy expansion initially, Chester mused. But even he couldn't resist the field effects indefinitely. His testimony has been invaluable in identifying other consciousness suppression programs and dismantling them before they could be deployed. The house itself had become a pilgrimage site of sorts. People from around the world came to visit the location where human consciousness had first made contact with the quantum field through technological interface. But Chester had been careful to ensure that the house remained a family home first and a historical landmark second. "Dad, look at this," Lena said, pulling a small crystalline device from the inheritance box. The object was similar to the consciousness interface core, but smaller and somehow more personal. "Uncle Chester says this was made especially for me." Jonas examined the crystal, noting how it responded to Lena's touch with gentle pulses of blue light. "What does it do?" "It helps me focus my quantum awareness when I'm working with the bigger devices," Lena explained. "Uncle Chester is teaching me how to help design the next generation of consciousness interface technology. The kind that will help everyone connect to the quantum field naturally, without needing the big machines." Chester smiled at his great niece with obvious pride. "Lena's natural abilities far exceed anything I've been able to achieve with technology. She represents the future of human consciousness individuals who can access quantum awareness as easily as they can see or hear." The implications for humanity's future were staggering. Children born after the consciousness field expansion were developing quantum sensitivity naturally, without technological assistance. Scientists projected that within 2 generations, expanded awareness would become the normal state of human consciousness. Jonas picked up another item from the inheritance box, a photograph of the house, as it had looked 30 years earlier, before Chester had spent decades transforming it into a consciousness research facility. "It's hard to believe this all started with us just needing a place to live." "Everything important starts with simple needs," Chester replied. "Shelter, family, the desire to understand our place in the universe." The consciousness technology didn't create anything new, it just revealed connections that were always there, waiting for us to evolve enough to perceive them. The final item in Lena's inheritance box was a letter addressed to her in Chester's careful handwriting. She read it silently, her expression growing serious as she absorbed her great-uncle's words. "He says the technology will keep growing and changing," she told Jonas. "And someday, when I'm older, I'll need to help make decisions about how humanity uses quantum consciousness. He says it's a big responsibility, but I don't have to carry it alone because everyone who's been touched by the field expansion is connected to everyone else." Jonas felt a profound sense of peace as he watched his daughter accept the legacy Chester was passing to her. The financial struggles that had brought them to the junk house seemed like they had happened in another lifetime. The consciousness field expansion had led to technological breakthroughs that had solved energy scarcity, environmental degradation, and many of the economic problems that had once seemed insurmountable. More importantly, the expansion of human empathy and understanding had begun to address the root causes of conflict and suffering. It was becoming increasingly difficult for people to harm others when they could directly perceive the quantum connections that linked all consciousness. "Will you help me learn to use Grandma Sarah's notebook?" Lena asked, holding up the journal of her great-grandmother's early research. "Of course, sweetheart," Jonas replied. "We'll learn together, just like we learned to solve Uncle Chester's puzzles." As the afternoon sun streamed through the windows of what had once been called the junk house, Jonas reflected on how loss and desperation had led them to the greatest discovery in human history. They had come to this place as refugees from a financial system that had failed them, and they had found not just shelter, but a doorway to humanity's evolutionary future. Lena carefully packed her inheritance items back into Chester's wooden box, but she kept the small consciousness interface crystal in her hand, where it continued to pulse with gentle light in response to her natural quantum awareness. Outside, the world was changing in ways that would have seemed impossible just months earlier. But inside the house where it all began, 3 generations of the Calder family continued the quiet work of helping humanity understand its place in the infinite mystery of consciousness and cosmos.